All right, it's 6:02. So I'm going to ask that we take a roll call and start the meeting. And hopefully the mayor will be able to join us shortly. So Lori?
Laurie Garcia here.
Maren?
Maren Goldstein here.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt here.
Marissa?
Marissa Crary here.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham here.
And Cindy Kwasinski here. Welcome to the March 9th school committee meeting. I want you to know we will be going into executive session at the end of this regular session, and we will be adjourning from executive session. Let me try that again. We're going to be going into executive session. We will adjourn from executive session, and we will not be returning. And we will be doing bargaining with the superintendent. So, do we have any announcements?
Yes, we do. I am happy to report that students have returned to the Easthampton Public Schools. We are very excited to welcome all our friends back to our schools, and there have been many positive comments by staff and students and families. So we could not be happier to have everyone back. On Wednesday, March 10th, there'll be a half day for students. Check with your school for dismissal time schedule. On Thursday, March 11th, there'll be couch conversations at 6:30 p.m. at Center Pepin. Principal Jill Pasquini-Torchia and Assistant Principal Andrea McCallum and the social emotional learning team will be welcoming families to informally chat. They suggest everyone come, be comfortable, grab a snack or a beverage, and it's fine to just observe as well. They miss having informal conversations and getting to know families. They will also discuss building resiliency in children. Also, another announcement at the elementary level, music night will be held on Thursday, March 25th at 6 p.m. Monday, March 29th, report cards are mailed home. There is a change to the parent-teacher conference dates. The new dates are Thursday and Friday, April 15th and 16th. Half-day dismissal at 12:10 at the elementary level on both those days. And the high school spring parent-teacher conferences are next Thursday, March 18th. They'll be held in two sessions, either 12 to 2 or 6 to 8. And those are all virtual. And that's all I have for you this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Marissa, do we have correspondence?
We do. Pull this up. So we have from Gabe Kohlenbach, the EHS senior captain of the basketball team, offering thanks for coming to an agreement on the basketball season at our last meeting. From Jared Kohlenbach, writing as Gabe's dad, also expressing appreciation. From Nancy Stenberg, urging the committee to pass a resolution demanding the suspension of MCAS testing for this academic year, which happy to share that we have already done that at a former meeting. Jessica Montagna, writing as a parent of a fifth grader in hybrid in response to the DESE reopening mandate, urging that we apply for the waiver. From Erin Tottenham, writing as a parent of two students, expressing interest in finding ways that EPS can open full-time, expressing concern that the pooled testing information wasn't conveyed appropriately, and urging that we reconsider busing. From Carrie Damon, writing as a parent of four students, urging that we take a holistic look at the consequence of school closures and urging we expand options for a full-time program for families who want to opt in. From Jessica Lucia, parent of a second grader thriving in hybrid, urging that we move forward with the goal to have full-time in-person learning for elementary students. From Desiree Gribby, parent of a student in hybrid, urging that we work toward full in-person school day by the end of the year, and sharing the physician's letter directed to Commissioner Riley, encouraging the return to school. From Melissa Carville-Zemer, urging the committee to continue using a science-based approach to decision-making and to apply for the waiver from the DESE mandate for reopening, and suggesting a primarily outdoor classroom model for the spring. From Evan Zemer, parent of a first grader, writing of concern for state mandate and urging the committee to seek a waiver, urging increased communication for explaining the pooled testing to parents to increase participation, and urging that we follow the CDC standard definition for close contact. And from Jen Sandler, expressing awe for the work of the teachers, and emailing as a concerned parent urging to request the waiver in order to maintain local control and allow teachers and building leadership to work together to decide the plan for the rest of the year. Additionally, we also have correspondence about an Indigenous Day resolution. I believe this came from City Council and the Mayor's office. So I wanted to check in with you, Cindy, if we're supposed to read that tonight, if you want me to read it or somebody else, because I understand we're going to be voting next at our next meeting.
Right. So I'm fine with us reading it now. But we'll put it on the next agenda to discuss and decide. That's fine.
Okay. I apologize. This will not be the impassioned performance of a resolution reading that we had from Laurie Garcia at our last meeting. It was beautiful. I will do my best. And it's quite long, so apologies also for that, but I think this is certainly an important matter and worth the time. Whereas Columbus Day has been celebrated unofficially since the early 18th century and was officially made a federal holiday in 1937 to be celebrated on the second Monday of October, with MGL Part 1, Title 1, Chapter 4, Section 7, Clause 18, setting aside the second Monday of October as a Massachusetts state holiday, and MGL Part 1, Title 2, Chapter 6, Section 12V, providing that the governor declare that day to be Columbus Day. And whereas Columbus Day commemorates the landing of Christopher Columbus in the Americas, specifically on the Caribbean islands of the Bahamas on October 12, 1492, and later on Hispaniola, present-day countries of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And whereas the first voyage of Columbus to the Americas initiated the transatlantic slave trade, journal entries from Columbus show his desire to enslave the indigenous populations of the Caribbean, and he subsequently imprisoned and transported many hundreds of people to this end, including trafficking women and girls as young as 9. And whereas Columbus's second voyage of 1493 was one of conquest, wherein 17 ships were led by him to the New World, and his governorship of the Caribbean island instituted systemic policies of slavery and extermination of indigenous populations, especially the Taino Arawak people, whose population was reduced from approximately 8 million to 100,000 during Columbus's reign, being further reduced by the continuation of his policies until near extinction in 1542. Whereas the example of the Taino Arawak people is merely indicative of the policies of Columbus and his men, and all told, millions of indigenous persons were exterminated in the Caribbean basin alone. And whereas through the introduction of European diseases may account for some of these deaths, starvation and over-extermination policies were mostly to blame, and thus these atrocities cannot be reasonably attributed to forces outside the control of European colonialists. And whereas the devastation of indigenous populations would lead to the kidnapping, deaths, and enslavement of at least 10 to 12 million African people, and the profound effects of the transatlantic slave trade and African diaspora continue to be felt to the present day, and whereas the cultures of the indigenous people of the Americas are worthy of being promoted, their history is rich, diverse, and worthy of celebration, and the actions and policies of European colonizers of the Americas actively destroyed and suppressed parts of those cultures. And whereas indigenous people of the lands that will later become known as the Americas have occupied these lands since time immemorial, and whereas the city of Easthampton, Massachusetts, has a history of opposing racism, this racism serving to perpetuate high rates of indigenous poverty and leading to inequities in health, education, and housing, and whereas the city wishes to honor our nation's indigenous roots, history, and contributions, as whereas the District of Columbia, states of Alaska, Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, Oregon, South Dakota, Vermont, Wisconsin, and localities including Somerville, Cambridge, Brookline, Marblehead, Northampton, Amherst, Portland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, Seattle, Columbus, Ohio, and many more have adopted Indigenous Peoples' Days as a counter-celebration in lieu of Columbus Day to promote Indigenous cultures and commemorate the history of Indigenous peoples. And whereas Indigenous Peoples' Day was first proposed in Geneva in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to United Nations-sponsored International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas, and whereas in 1990, representatives from 120 Indigenous nations at the First Continental Conference on 500 Years of Indian Resistance unanimously passed a resolution to transform Columbus Day into an occasion to strengthen the process of continental unity and struggle toward liberation, and thereby use the occasion to reveal a more accurate historical record. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council votes as follows. So we would amend this to that the Easthampton School Committee votes as follows: to establish that the second Monday of October henceforth be commemorated as Indigenous Peoples Day in Easthampton rather than Columbus Day, in recognition of the position of Indigenous peoples as native to these lands and the suffering they faced during and since the European conquest. Be it further resolved that the people of Easthampton observe Indigenous Peoples Day reflecting upon the dispossession of the homelands and villages of the Pocumtuck, Nipmuc, and other Indigenous people of this region who lived here for millennia prior to the arrival of European settlers, and upon the history of the other Indigenous people who have lived in Easthampton, and to celebrate the survival of Indigenous people against all odds, as well as to celebrate the thriving cultures and values that Indigenous peoples have brought and continue to bring to our city and the wider community, and to reflect on the meanings, honor, and celebrate the names and language that are utilized for the places in our city and community. Be it further resolved that Easthampton shall include Indigenous representation from the city in as much as possible, and will also seek representation from Indigenous organizations in the area, as well as other Easthampton community representation from segments of the community, such as citizens, school, nonprofit organizations, and businesses. Be it further resolved that the school committee encourages the Easthampton Public Schools to observe this day with appropriate exercise and instruction in all schools around the time of Indigenous People Day, to the end that the cultural history and diversity of Indigenous people be celebrated and perpetuated. Be it further resolved that perhaps we would strike this one because it's really city council specific, but be it further resolved that the city encourages businesses, organizations, and public institutions to recognize and observe Indigenous Peoples Day. And be it further resolved that the city clerk shall ensure that the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapoag, Mashpee Wampanoag Indian Tribal Council, the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead, the Nipmuc Nation Tribal Council, including the Hassanamisco and Natick, the Asanet Band of Wampanoags, the Chappaquiddick Wampanoags. This is a real test of my vocabulary. This is a really challenging one. The Nipmuc, the Pocasset Wampanoag, the Herring Pond Wampanoag, and the Seekonk Wampanoag, all of which include descendants of those people indigenous to Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Commission of Indian Affairs, North American Indian Center of Boston, Indigenous Peoples Day, MA.org, United American Indians of New England, Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness, as well as the Easthampton School Committee and the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the Springfield Republic. The reminder: receive a suitably endorsed copy of this resolution. And that is it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for bearing with me.
We will put that on next week, our next meeting's agenda, and then we'll talk about it.
Great.
Thank you. Any other correspondence?
That is it.
Okay. Our next meeting will be March 23rd, and it will be a public hearing on the budget. So, all right, now we have reached the part of our meeting for public speak. I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself, that you signal that you would like to speak, and that you hold your comments to 3 minutes. I also want to remind people, because sometimes I see hands raised, it's not possible once we close public speak to keep calling on the public. So you will have this time to speak, and then once we close that and go on with the meeting, I will not be able to call on you. And I'm looking, and right now I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I'm taking my time scrolling through.
See one from Melissa?
Oh, okay, then let's have Melissa.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Drysdale Morrissey. I live at 6 Apple Tree Lane. My daughter began in-person kindergarten last month at Maple School, and she has been so thrilled. We are so grateful for the work of the teachers and staff at Maple who have welcomed her to the classroom. I come to you with grave concerns about the latest state guidance, which demands a full return to school while reducing student spacing to 3 feet. Bringing back a full class of 20 kids with only 3-foot spacing as a recipe for clusters of outbreaks, especially with new variants on the horizon. And while teachers will be vaccinated, our children will not. 6 feet of distance is critical to reducing close contacts and stopping the spread of the virus, and we must do everything we can to preserve that 6-foot standard. For a return to full-time learning to be safe and successful, we need creative solutions and the time to implement them. I urge you to apply for a waiver to give the district more time to thoughtfully prepare. I teach elementary music in Longmeadow Public Schools, where we have been back fully in person for a while now, all while maintaining that 6-foot distance. Special subjects are on a 6-week rotation and visit classes on a cart. This freed up new space in the building for classrooms and new lunch rotations. Teachers and staff were reassigned to add an additional section per grade level. And some new staff hired in order to reduce class sizes. Students eat lunch outdoors, picnic style on the blacktop whenever possible. And yes, I know Easthampton is a different place. And yes, our buildings are tiny. And yes, our budget is woefully underfunded. These are just a few examples of the creativity that has helped other districts return to learning while maintaining 6 feet of space. Could we consider using alternative spaces in town, like churches or the old Sunnyside daycare facility? Could we add new sections for each grade level to reduce class size? Can we reclaim spaces that aren't being used and repurpose them? Our families are relying on you, members of the school committee, and this is our challenge to you. Let's be creative, innovative, and bold. Let's do the math, scrape together the funds, and find solutions that preserve our existing protocols, which we know are working. I urge you to commit to 6 feet of spacing and to take the necessary time and care to bring our students back safely. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda B.
Hello. I wanted to also say my daughter started back this week at the high school. And even though it was, not even quite 3 hours, she came home with the biggest smile on her face. What a difference being in school made for her. I was very pleased that you're moving forward. And as far as the waiver, I hear a lot of people asking for it. I am confused because I thought Easthampton said if you don't want your child back in school this year, Easthampton's going to honor them being remote. So with people pushing to have the waiver and not wanting to move forward, trying to get full time in school, if they don't want to be there, they don't have to. But it's frustrating when I want my child there. I'm not telling other people you have to go. I'm not trying to make it difficult for them. They have the option to stay home. Please don't make it even more difficult to start getting our kids back full time.
Cannabis money can that be used?
So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean L.
Hi. My name is Jean Libby. I'm a parent of a kiddo in first grade at Maple School. And I'm speaking tonight to urge the school committee to submit a waiver to delay implementation of DESE's newest guidelines that require full-time in-person school for elementary students beginning on April 5th. DESE's latest guidance includes a 3-foot distance requirement, which is reckless. Their plan is chaotic for schools and for teachers and for students. But I want to specifically address that it's practically infeasible in our elementary classrooms. We need creative solutions for moving to full-time schooling. We all want full-time schooling to happen. I don't think that doing it in this spacing guideline is the right way to do it. Applying for a waiver will allow us to find those solutions and creative ways that was mentioned earlier to address these challenges. But doubling the number of students in class and smooshing them closer together and doubling the amount of time they are in the classroom is a recipe for virus spread. Even with a 3 feet seat edge-to-edge space requirement, classes with 15 to 22 students will not be able to be accommodated in the classroom. Our buildings are too small to physically make this work. While I believe that a 3-foot spacing guideline is risky for spreading COVID and creates an even less safe environment for our teachers and paras, that's not what DESE is going to be basing their waiver guidelines on. I was just looking at it earlier today. DESE's waiver guidelines will not grant waivers just based on that spacing. So we need to focus on the actual physical classrooms and submit our requests based on the fact that most of our classrooms will not be able to fit 15 to 22 students in the room at a 3-foot distance. The elementary waiver request must be sent to DESE by March 22nd. and there are a number of requirements to meet before submitting a waiver. So I request that the school committee vote tonight to request Superintendent Leclerc or ask that she would submit a waiver on behalf of our elementary school buildings. We all have fought so hard to have this safe reopening, and it's so heartening to hear how awesome our kids are doing in this model. I know our current hybrid model is not ideal for everyone, but at least it's safe. It's based on science. It meets some of the needs for our kids to be back in school. So let's get a waiver so we can continue to work diligently within our hybrid model and ensure that we can make it out of this pandemic alive. There is no sense in throwing in the towel on all the work that we've done, these effective safety measures that we already have in place. We are so close to the end. Let's just keep listening to science and moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? This is your chance. iPhone has raised hand. Okay. I don't know. There's a number of iPhones on, so you could unmute and tell us who you are.
Hello. This is Amy Lehan. I can't figure out how to turn the video on. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I am mother of a third grader at Pepin and a fifth grader at Whitebrook. Neither of my children have started school yet. They are hoping to be there on Monday, and we're very excited about that. I believe our children need to be back in school. All of our children need to be back in school. As a nurse at a private school, I've seen a much healthier student body this year than ever before. There are many private schools in the area that have operated successfully through this pandemic. Masks and distancing works. Students are quite capable of following the rules for those protocols if they are clear, modeled, and enforced. People can get used to wearing masks for extended periods with no breaks. The district has had a full year to prepare safety measures for all these kids to return. Plexiglass dividers, tents, meeting in larger spaces such as auditoriums, gyms, cafeterias, outside spaces. I liked the idea of Sunnyside Child Care Center or other spaces like that in the community. We knew the classrooms weren't going to magically grow bigger over the past few months. So if 3 feet distanced isn't far enough to keep all of our children in school and safe, the schools should have already been thinking outside the box. They'll simply have to put in the time now to figure it out like all the rest of us have. On the fly. A year is more than enough. Our children need to be back in school. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I would start your video. I would like to speak, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
Okay. Can you tell us who you are?
I didn't want to be out of order.
No, that's okay.
My name is Lynn Wanamaker. I'm a parent of an Easthampton High School senior. I live on Maple Street. I want to add my voice to those who are asking that we submit a request for a waiver so that we can maintain the CDC recommended 6-foot guidelines. Like those who have spoken before me, I think that we've come too far in this race to stumble now, and that we really want to have the time and consideration to take the next step. We've just opened hybrid. We want to make sure we do the next step right. And we want to stick with the CDC guidelines. I also want to say that solutions that suggest that if an individual is not comfortable, they should keep their own children at home, not only fail the measure of justice, equity, and compassion, and centering those who are at highest risk of this virus, but they also fundamentally misunderstand how the virus works. It's a communal problem. It's not an individual problem, and so we're going to have to solve it together. If transmission rates go up in our community, that's a risk for everybody, even those of us who may have chosen to stay home or to leave our jobs in order to avoid it. So this is something we have to solve together. I also want to encourage the school committee to take all necessary steps to ensure maximum benefit from the pooled surveillance testing, which is available for us, either by making it mandatory for in-person learning or by implementing a dramatically stepped up public education campaign. Whether mandatory or voluntary, parents need and deserve information in 4 areas about pooled testing. We need to know what pooled surveillance testing is and why it's a great prevention strategy. We need to know what the experience of testing will be like for our children. We need to know how the logistics are going to work. and we need to know how to actually sign up. And with great respect for everything that everyone on the committee is doing and all our administrators are doing, I know that you're juggling many competing priorities, but the communication around pooled surveillance testing has been woefully inadequate. If we fail to implement this strategy, we have squandered an incredible resource that has been used to good effect in congregate care settings and colleges and private schools. And just to contextualize my opinion, I'm a social worker who started my career in HIV/AIDS work. My area of expertise is in prevention education, and I oversee a congregate care facility. So I've been involved in conversations about surveillance testing since the summer. We can't leave this on the table. And the last thing, I want to strongly oppose the concept of indoor mask breaks at the high school. I think that that is an unnecessary risk for us to take. High schoolers many of them are working, are essential workers. They're accustomed to wearing masks for long periods of time. They can clearly handle a couple of hours in the partial school day, and there's no justification in taking that risk of having gatherings of unmasked people inside. That's completely unnecessary. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Anyone else? Carrie?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just, my children also returned this week and had a first time in a year that I've seen very engaged kids in the process. The teachers and the staff have just been amazing. You have very much to be proud of with what's gone on in the schools this week. So very much looking forward to more. And I'm also writing about the waiver. It worries me that we're going to further delay possibly increased return in school or options for our children, at least to provide options to families like ours that are willing to take some risk. There's risks on every side of this decision. In every decision we make as parents and educators, there is risk there. The impact that it's happening, that's occurring on, at least in my family, as my kids are trying to get ready to apply for colleges and not being with their student colleagues and their teachers to help them through that process. I can name right off the bat things that they've missed because they're missing out on this sort of being together in school. So I understand the complexities around the waiver and the application process. I just really implore you to look at providing all the families, all the options. I fully respect decisions that other families might make. It's been a year and our kids need to be back in as much as possible. I understand there's certain things that have to be in place. We have to meet those for safety. Understand I work in healthcare. That's what we live and breathe that. So I'm just here to implore you to look at all those factors, taking that holistic view that I wrote to you about in the letter on the impact of our children of further delaying a return in school. I thank you again very much for all of your work, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the kids having the opportunity to be in school this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm scrolling through. Jean Sandler.
Hi, it's Jen.
Jen, sorry, I misread it.
It's okay.
My bad.
I guess I would like to say that I think you all have done an amazing job, and I think that our teachers have done an incredible job of adjusting over and over to obviously unprecedented circumstances of schooling. The return to hybrid was thoughtful. It was a long-term plan to return, and I really appreciate it. My kid is staying remote, and I supported the return to hybrid with the one concern about teacher vaccination, which has now been solved. And I'm very pleased with just the professionalism and the thoughtfulness and care for safety. I just think that we have done a really amazing job in Easthampton, and it's been a lot of work, and you all have done it. And I really resent the state coming in and saying what everybody should be doing, not taking into account the different circumstances of different communities and different school districts. We have very particular circumstances, particularly in our buildings. We have unusually inadequate buildings. We all know this. We voted to fix it. It didn't come in time for this moment. And for you all to, I think it's important to apply for a waiver to say we have a very particular community. We have been really good and thoughtful about how we're trying to get as many of our kids the services they need, which includes as much as possible in return to in-school services safely and thoughtfully and professionally. We know what we're doing in Easthampton, even when we disagree with each other. We disagree productively, I think, and this year has shown a lot of growth, I think, for our community and for our engagement in our schools and what that engagement can push us to do. And I want us to maintain that autonomy locally. I think that we deserve that autonomy, and I think that we should apply for a waiver to try to figure out how to incorporate with equity in mind, more kids in our schools more of the time in a safe way. I think that we can do that, and I think we should. I think that we have every reason to apply for and to get a waiver from the state to maintain the autonomy that's enabled us to stay as safe as possible this year. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you. Anyone else? Lori McCullough.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm a first grade teacher. Oh, am I showing you my I think I might be showing you my my work board, but I'm not going to deal with trying to fix that right now. I'm a first grade teacher at Pepin, and I just want to point out to you, I know it's great news that teachers are going to be allowed to be vaccinated in a couple of days. Just know that most of us aren't. We are up at 3. I was up at 3:30 this morning trying to get on, and it's not as easy. Just because it's allowed doesn't mean it's happening. So just know that it's going to be a few weeks, maybe longer, before your children's teachers are indeed vaccinated. And getting shot also doesn't mean that you have the immunity. It's a little while after that. So yeah, let's remember that just because we're getting the shots, we're not safe for a while. And yes, the kids can't get the shot, but it's the grown-ups that we're more concerned about, correct? And the science has shown that the grown-ups are the ones who have the health issues. So it is, I guess I just want to reiterate to you and to the public that just because it's available, sort of, in quotation marks, doesn't mean it's available, that we can actually get it. So just want to make sure we all are on that same page. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Scrolling through. Ben Hershey, please.
Hello, my name is Ben Hersey. I'm the father of a second grader at Maple. Just sort of standing with the folks who have already spoken incredibly eloquently about the need to apply for a waiver. I feel incredibly frustrated with DESE for kind of disregarding the incredible amount of work that we have done in this district and the thoughtful and patient working through of unbelievably complex problems, specifically because we have ancient school buildings. I've looked at the guidance that was put out today, and just as an example, I'm focusing on the mealtime section, which requires 6 feet distance. And I don't know how you do that in the Maple cafeteria, in quotes, which is really just a basement storage room. Perhaps we set up an outside tent, and those kinds of things could work. But the demands put on us by DESE utterly disregard the realities on the ground here. For instance, they're telling us that we have to replace cafe tables with desks in the cafeteria to increase capacity at 6 feet distancing. What desks? Who's going to put those desks in there? And they're talking about monitoring that space, and they're including people like crossing guards or volunteer parents, which is all possible. We have an incredible community. But to put this out there and just expect people to fall in line with it feels insulting, and for us, a community that is so dedicated to the question of equity, this just feels like a slap in the face. So I just really hope, I am incredibly excited about the idea of getting back to school, and was also really encouraged to send my kid back part-time in the hybrid model. but this is going to force me out. We're not going to go back in these conditions because they don't feel safe. And I know that's my right and everything, but in any case, we need more time. If nothing else, we need more time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking through. Raise your hand, signal if you want to talk. And if you can't signal, just jump in. All right. Marissa, I do not see anybody.
Me neither.
I'm scrolling through the last time. And when I get to the front page, all right, I am going to thank everybody for their comments and close public speak. So now on to policy subcommittee update.
We have not had a meeting and we don't have one scheduled.
Okay. And do you plan to have one soon or?
There's not been any updates from MASC, so not at this time.
That was my next question. Thank you. Okay. Finance subcommittee, Mirren?
Yeah, so Finance Subcommittee has met. We've been working with the mayor and business manager, Dale Dorian, to be able to review the budget for FY22. We've to date sort of worked through all of the pieces of the budget, and we'll be actually meeting next tomorrow to be able to then take a look at those, how those actually fit with the financial restraints put forward by the city, and how we will then be able to sort of meet those limitations. So trying to still look forward to be able to fund the programs and the staffing that we need, not be able to reduce any staffing. And the other piece that I think is important to know too, that even though we are headed next year into a transition period with the buildings, we will still be pretty much all of our elementary schools will still have a full year next year. The middle school will be in the transition mid-year. And then, so a lot of the savings that we're going to be seeing from the new building will most likely be coming in the following year. And there'll be some savings, but not, I mean, there's going to be some changes. So we'll be dealing with that in the future. But this next year, we still have all the different buildings that we have to be dealing with and managing and all the staff. So we're going to be looking at sort of finalizing those numbers tomorrow, and then bringing that to the full committee in our next school committee meeting to be approving and finalizing that to be able to then send to the city.
Thank you. Do we have a collaborative update, Jonathan?
I do not have an update for you at this time.
Okay. And a COVID response update?
Once again, we met yesterday, as we do every week. And I really appreciate what Ben just said, because it truly is insulting that after this community has worked so hard to follow science, meeting with health professionals, that everything we have done to have a safe re-entry into our schools is being pulled out from under us. So I hope that we do go for a waiver. But that's not what we talked about in the committee yesterday in our COVID response team. We talked a lot about pool testing and how to convince the community to sign up their children, and teachers also to also sign into pool testing, because no matter what, our students are back. They're back hybrid now. And especially if we are forced to pack our classrooms in such an unhealthy manner, if we don't have this readily available surveillance testing, it's going to be much more dangerous. So the first thing we have to do as a community is get those forms in. Dr. LeClaire did put a lot of information. She was very sorry that there was a form that people couldn't open. She reposted it. She really has gone out of her way to put a lot of information there. So if you have trouble finding it, please let us know. because we're trying to make it easy for you to understand why pool testing is extremely necessary in these current circumstances. We also talked about the new phenomenal dashboard that our public nurse has posted, and it's also linked on our school website. So families should always be looking at that to know how we look at the metrics when we meet in our COVID response team. And we are also going to have, it was Megan Harvey that had a wonderful idea just to have one part of the dashboard with the metrics that we look at for the 14-day in Easthampton and Hampshire County, so you know exactly what we're looking at when decisions are made. But once again, I'll go back to my initial statement this evening. Our decisions have been made based on science, but now what? So we have to think about that as a community. Megan did send us an email today for next week to discuss if we are forced into this situation, what we can do to make it safer. It would require a lot of funding, and we do not know if that funding will come from the state. We have, once again, we didn't discuss this as a team, but she wanted the email to get out before the meeting tonight. She said one way would be plexiglass barriers, which are very expensive. So somebody mentioned how private schools do it. I've been saying all along, private schools have more funding than we have. So to compare how we have tried to get our students back in to how private schools are able to do it is very unfair. I also want everybody to know that the Board of Education is not a democratically elected board. It's a politically appointed board. So you have to realize that you have a school committee that you elected, and we are trying to do everything possible for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. All right. So now I think this is Dr. LeClaire we're looking at, or is this Marissa who's going to present this? The 2021-2022 school year resolution. I think that's on Marissa's plate again. Do I have that right?
Yes, let me pull up the text. I'm sorry. I'm not seeing it in the packet right here. So this seems like sort of a bit out of order to be discussing next year when we are so suddenly having to face urgent questions about our current moment and this looming date of April 5th. So I don't know how much we'll be able to feel really prepared to talk about it at this point in the meeting. But I propose that we look at a resolution that the Amherst School District adopted at a recent meeting that offers a chance for the school committee to articulate its intentions for the coming academic year in fall. Sorry, I've got my little one here for 1 second. And really thinking about acknowledging that families and caretakers are trying to make decisions for how they're going to handle educational plans and daycare plans for their children in the upcoming year. Acknowledging that I think there's a lot of people on the school committee, if not all of us, who are concerned about rushing headlong for an April 5th deadline. But on the other hand, also, at least from my perspective, I'm interested in seeing us track safely and appropriately toward a full-time opening for the fall. So I think it's useful for us to start really working toward that goal while we still have time to be making the appropriate plans. And then also just to signal to the community what our intentions as a committee are. If the majority of us on the committee feel like it's not reasonable to expect that we would necessarily be able to open full-time in fall, then I think that it's just appropriate to also give the community an opportunity to process that information. So I think everyone has a copy of the resolution. Mm-hmm. Right. So I would open it to discussion from there.
Did you want to read it though?
Oh, sure. So it's very short, and I will swap out. I borrowed this directly from Amherst, and I will just swap in Easthampton. So it's says, provided that the safety guidelines of local public health officials are fully adhered to, the Easthampton Public Schools will provide full-time in-person learning for the full 2021-2022 school year for all students. The superintendent will manage this plan and any shift back to remote learning based on a continuous assessment of health conditions in direct consultation with local public health officials. The superintendent will collaborate with and gather input from faculty and staff leadership, the school committees, and student families to inform this plan.
Any discussion? Maren?
I want to agree with the sentiment that Marissa just spoke to. I think it's absolutely critical. We've been dealing with a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty, and I think that we do want to put forth clarity that it is our full intention to be functioning as best as absolutely possible in the fall, and that classes will be back to normal given health and science review of that situation. So I certainly would second that if we're moving to a motion, if that's what Marissa was, didn't catch if that was a motion or not, but.
I don't think I officially made a motion, but
okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to talk about it at all? Jonathan?
I'll just weigh in and say that from an ideological perspective, obviously fully in favor of pointing us in that direction. I'd be curious to consider more what role specifically what role the further assessment of science and data will play. Obviously, we're moving in a great direction now as community locally and at a broader scale than that. And yet, we've seen setbacks before, and there's a part of me that has a really hard time grappling with how things are going to look in 6 months. That's just my stance. I'm very much in favor of the concept, and yet feel it's important to maintain some flexibility in the matter.
So my sense is that we still maintain that flexibility. From my perspective, what I see this as is a promise to the families of Easthampton that we are going to try our very best, and it's our hope that we are going to open in the fall full-time, and we'll look at the numbers. I think if we make that commitment, we're also obligated to come up with creative solutions to figure out how we're going to make that happen. So that's my read of this resolution. And I think it's, from my perspective, it's a way of helping people to have hope. And I can tell you, it's been a hard year for a lot of people. Even 2021 has not been easy, and I think it's time for hope. So, I feel really comfortable with that resolution. I feel comfortable telling people, we're going to do our very best, and we're going to be as creative as we can to make sure that we can do this. Yes, the ceiling could fall down. And if it does, then the whole world's going to be taking another look. But barring that, I feel very comfortable in promising. My personal promise is that I will do my best to make sure that we are open full-time for business in the fall. And my hope is that everybody's going to behave and do what they need to do to get it to happen. So I'm all for it.
So just for the sake of discussion, I'm curious your thoughts to everybody. Like, let's say the bottom doesn't fall out and somehow we just manage to trend sideways, let's say. We're obviously saying that if we were to apply for the waiver, we're essentially saying that 3 feet distance is not good enough in our circumstances now. But given the restraints of our classrooms, the understanding that we will be in the same buildings for at least a part of the year, are we saying that that's something that we will be reconsidering our stance on?
I think that's really interesting, Jonathan. I think that's kind of exactly what the conversation I'm hoping to have, and that like it's early March now, and if we're talking about next September, instead of sort of like waiting and crossing our fingers that all of the health metrics reach a point where we can just resume using our facilities the way that we normally do, but to instead like actually have time to build in those creative solutions that would allow a full-time program, even if at that point of opening, we still feel like we need more space than 3 feet or whatever it might be, to be very proactive by making the commitment whether we're going to open and then work to that goal of what does it take, not just like, will the community behave and the disease numbers drop, but what can we do to make sure that we can fulfill that commitment?
Yeah, I'm not interested in giving up safety to open up in the fall, but I agree that if we pledge to try to open up in the fall, then it's up to all of us to create a plan that's creative and allowing that to happen. I think Shannon and Lori, and then Shannon, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Okay.
But Lori was hurt.
Okay, go ahead, Lori.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. I feel that we can be very optimistic for the fall and pass this resolution because many more people are going to be vaccinated. And I think the statement, I believe it was Laurie McCullough, sorry, I try to take notes as you're all speaking, a teacher who said, even if the vaccine is supposedly available, the rollout has been pathetic in this state. Teachers should have been vaccinated during February vacation. We wouldn't need to be considering the things we need to consider if so many people had already been vaccinated that are going to be forced into crowded classrooms. So by the fall, I have high hopes, not only the teachers, but family members, adults, so many more people. Even we are hearing that children may be vaccinated. So I am so optimistic that come the fall, we really can move forward. And I just want to reiterate something that I said months ago, something that once again, I'm so thankful to Megan. She always gives me these bits of information. It was in the fall that our epidemiologist said, I have hopes that by February, the end of February, we'll be planning to bring students back into hybrid at least by the beginning of March because of the change in numbers, because of the change of administration who is going to provide more support for vaccinating. And I really see that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. So I don't want people to feel like we don't want your children in full classrooms. We would love it.
Thank you. Shannon?
I was actually going to say the same thing. You know, I mean, I felt more comfortable saying that in the fall that, yes, I feel like people will have more time to get the vaccination. Even if they get vaccinated today, they won't even have their second vaccination by April 5th. So, you know, and I've been trying for weeks to get a vaccination and I can't. I just can't find an open appointment. So I was going to say the same thing.
Thank you. Anybody else? By the way, I have some personal information I will share about how to get yourself through that system. But let's talk about this first.
I just want to say thanks to all of you for contributing to the discussion.
Thank you. All right. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Do we accept the resolution?
I'll second that.
All right. Any more discussion? All right, here we go. Maren?
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Marissa,
Marissa Crary, aye.
Jonathan,
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Shannon,
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Mayor LaChapelle,
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Lori Garcia, sorry,
Aye.
and Cindy Kuzensky, aye. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay. MCAS waiver resolution. Marissa, do you want somebody else to read it just to give you a break?
Oh, sure. I had to give everyone a break from my voice, really.
No, your voice is lovely. It's just you've read two already. So does anybody want to read that?
I'm sorry. I thought we already did this.
I thought so too. But have we done it and it's just on there? That's what I thought. Okay. Yes, right? Sue, can we check and make sure?
I'm sure. We do. I think it was
Okay.
in January or December.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It was more like a letter. It didn't sound like a resolution because it wasn't the whereas.
That is
Oh,
true.
we were deliberately bucking
Yes.
the whereas tradition.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why it's different. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's on here. And so I'm glad we're talking about it. We did write the letter. The letter I remembered, the resolution I didn't. So I feel like we've already done it and we don't have to. However, other school districts are putting together resolutions and sending them out. So it's worth considering.
I think we considered it a resolution. Did we not?
We sent it as a letter, not as a resolution though, right?
It was a
Still-
resolution.
It was.
Mhm.
Like, stop me when I say that. Don't let me go down
I
that
just
road.
found we just didn't use the old hereby forthwith resolved. We just wrote it in plain language, but it was passed as a resolution.
Okay. All right. Then we're done. All right.
But I
We
can
don't have to.
I could send it to you, Cindy, if you wanted to make sure
No,
that it's going
I'm
wherever other
Yeah.
districts are currently sending it.
If that's the only thing that we would be doing differently, I think we're okay as long as everybody's comfortable with that. Yes, we're good? Okay, all right, we'll do that. Okay, so let's go on to our superintendent update. The first thing is COVID metrics, student number returning, and reopening update.
Okay, I'm just opening up, I'm going to share my screen, and Laurie mentioned the metrics already. Can everyone see my screen? Can you
Yes.
see it? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to direct you and families to where you can find the information Laurie alluded to. So on the district website, we have a COVID-19 tab. It's a drop-down menu. The first button is COVID-19 metrics dashboard. That will take you to the city webpage where this graphic will be updated on a weekly basis. And this is where, for families, for our school committee, this is where we're getting the data to help us determine if we are remaining in school or if we need to convene a COVID response team meeting to discuss numbers increasing. So I just wanted to point out that that's where the information lives. So I really appreciate on the city side, Amy Hart, who's the city nurse who works in the health department, and she worked diligently to get that tool for us and get that up and running. So now I just want to share my PowerPoint. Let me see. With all of you. And let me put it into. So I've tried to include all of the things I think you want to talk about tonight. The first few slides are just updates, so I'll try to move through them in a quick manner. Metrics, I just shared with you where the metrics are. Our metrics continue to look very good in Easthampton and in Hampshire County. Hampshire County, they're a little bit higher than Easthampton, but that's a trend we're continuing to monitor. In-person versus remote, I wanted to share with you that as of yesterday, we have 940 students returning to our schools, and 593 are remaining in remote. However, in a conversation with the principals today, they are continuing to get phone calls from parents that want to switch from remote to in-person. You know, they've just decided this week. so that number will continuously shift, but we are doing really well, I think, with the number of students that we have coming back into our schools. Transportation update. Every student whose family indicated they needed transportation has been accommodated, with the exception of 2 school choice students who do not live in Easthampton. Those were the only 2 that we denied. We are still adding students to the bus route. Again, it is changing every day, and we are updating bus routes every single day, and the updated routes are on our website. Currently, the passengers, we have 51 elementary, 131 middle school, and 44 high school students. And the number of students on a bus range from 1 to 22. We've kept that number where you wanted it to be. Currently, we're using 4 buses per tier, that's per loop, per school, to complete it, and 2 vocational school routes. So we are busy, and this transportation will be a challenge as we go forward. And I just want to reiterate, I think we've discussed this previously, but Dale asked that I remind people, and we've tried to say this in all our communications, for the people that do not qualify under our school committee policy, but we've accommodated them, that does not guarantee that they will be accommodated for the remainder of the school year. Because as we have more and more students that are indicating they want to return to school, we have more students that qualify for the bus. So there may be a tipping point where we're not going to be able to accommodate every student that wants a ride. But we're doing the very best that we can right now. And hopefully that time when it does arrive will be warmer weather. Pooled testing is set to begin next week. We delayed it 1 week. We're up to about 24% of our students have signed up. Students and staff will be participating. It's for adults and for students. And more information will be coming. We continue to try to put information out in different formats. There's a frequently asked questions document on our website, and we will send that home under separate cover. We had a discussion about it, as Laurie said, at our COVID response team meeting, so more information will be coming on that. And I will be able to report out at our next meeting how we're doing with it.
Great. Dr. LeClaire, can I ask you just, we did get a number of people reaching out that the information was difficult to understand. Do you have a sense of what the problem was so that we could change that? Have people given enough feedback so that you can change what it is that they're confused about and get that information out?
A lot of people initially thought that they did not have the access code. The access code is Element East, which was in there, but it was just such a weird code that people thought they didn't have it. So they asked me, I heard from a lot of people that were asking about what the code was to sign up. The frequently asked questions document, I was told, I sent it out, it's a PDF, and I sent it out on Friday to families. And I was told that many families, depending on the device they used, were unable to open it. So my understanding was that I received some emails from people asking for permission, and I granted permission to open it. But I understand that some people just cut and pasted it and put it on social media so it was there, and it's now on our website as well. So I think it's there. I'm not sure. I think it's the unknown. I think people are not quite sure what it is, but for those that have ever had a regular COVID test, not the one where they stick it way up your nose, just the little Q-tip inside your nose, that's all it is.
Well, Dr. Leclerc, that's exactly what I was going to say. Feedback that I've heard from families were a lot of questions around what's the experience going to be like for my kid. And I think a lot of people are still recalling the earliest tests that were very painful and want to avoid that.
Yeah, so I will tell people it's, there will be a cup in the classroom. Students will be given a little Q-tip, just a little regular size Q-tip, not a long Q-tip. There's like a 2-minute video students watch, and it's very cute. It's very easily done. All they do is put the little Q-tip right inside their nose, swish it around a few times, do the other nostril, and then they put it in the cup. It takes about 15 seconds. It's really nothing. And all they have to do is just pull their mask down a little bit. They can keep their mask right over their mouth. And so, we anticipate, we've been told that grades 2 through 12 should be able to do it on their own from the very first time they receive instruction.
Is that video something you could share? Like, is there some way that could be like embedded as a YouTube link or something to make it easy so that way
I will ask the IT department that, Marissa. That's above my...
Yeah, because I think it would be really great if families could see what it's going to be before commit their kids to it. And then I think the other question, and I know this was in the FAQ, but as you've mentioned, there were problems with accessing the FAQ, but I think there were questions around, well, what happens if there's a positive result? And does that then mean that everyone has to go find a pediatrician to get a test? And so I think really clarifying that all of the students in that pool will have access to a rapid test that is provided free on site at their school is a big deal in terms of easing that concern.
Yes, that's correct. So every student, if they're in a positive pool, will have that option, and their parents will just drive up in a car and they'll roll down the window, and the nurse will test the student in the car. They don't even have to come into the building. Or they can help the nurse can speak with the family about helping them find a place to go and get tested if they would prefer that option. Some people would prefer maybe to go to their pediatrician, and that would be up to them.
I think this is a good time to bring up, and this actually a parent had talked about this in a letter, and we talked about it in COVID response. So if we were forced to eliminate our 6-foot barrier, and this doesn't even just have to do with pool testing, anytime there is a positive case of COVID, and if people were within 6 feet of that person with or without a mask for a total of 15 minutes in 24 hours, then that person would have to be quarantined and tested after 5 days. So this mandate to eliminate the 6-foot barrier is going to cause quarantines all over the state, not only with students, families, but teachers.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the information that came out this afternoon. And I ask for forgiveness in advance because I quickly put these slides together this afternoon because the guidance came out around 2 o'clock. So if there are errors in spelling on grammar, please forgive me. I knew that this information would be very important for you to have tonight. And I didn't want to make the assumption that everyone would have read the 12-page document prior to this meeting. So so the Board of Education met on Friday. That video is available. You can find it if you want to watch it. And they authorized, they gave power to the Commissioner of Education. They gave him the authority to require that as of April 5th, elementary schools will be back full-time in person, using that the in-person learning model for instructional hours. And that is a requirement. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me go back one. Just trying to move my people. There we go. To count, and the full in-person time is all that will count towards the structured learning time. And I'm just trying to give you the factual information. So the requirement is that the elementary school phase will begin on April 5th. Districts and schools are required to shift their learning model to full-time in-person 5 days per week, effective Monday, April 5th. Middle school phase will begin April 28th. In the high school phase, they will announce the details of that plan in April, and the district will be provided with at least 2 weeks advance notice. Thank goodness. But those are the timelines that have been put forward. What's the definition of a full day? Well, the requirement calls for, well, I can't even see it because this thing is in the way. There we go. The requirement for full-time in-person learning means that all structured learning time, an average of 5 hours per day of structured learning time at the elementary level and 5.5 hours per day at the secondary level, are required to be delivered in person 5 days per week. This will generally mean that students are attending a full school day equivalent to the length of their school day pre-pandemic. Now, I want to also make clear before people get upset that families will have the option to remain fully in remote. This does not change that. So I want to be very clear. I also want to be clear because people have bandied around the 3 feet quite a bit. And I want to be clear what the actual language from DESE says. Again, I'm trying to be very factual for this conversation. The CDC continues to recommend a 6-foot distancing in its guidance. And then DESE says, we will continue to recommend 6 feet of distance where feasible and a minimum of 3 feet when all other mitigation factors are in place. So I want to be very clear. It's not one or the other, okay? If we are to return on April 5th, we will be looking at how many students will be returning to that classroom and then spreading those students out to the maximum possible distance that we can. Maybe that's 6 feet, maybe it's 5 feet, maybe it's 4 feet, maybe it's 3 feet. But I want to just be clear that we will look at all options. And then I wanted to include this because I know that parents are asking you to kind of push for a waiver. So I wanted to just let you know that this is directly from the guidance, so the requirement document. Because the regulations have the force of law, once the commissioner makes the determination that hybrid and remote learning will no longer count towards structured learning time, a school committee vote on which learning model to adopt is not necessary because full-time in-person learning will be the default required model, which is true in normal pre-pandemic times. You wouldn't vote on a learning model. The waiver process. The commissioner may, in his discretion, grant a waiver for a limited set of circumstances in which districts make a compelling case that they must take an incremental approach to implementation of these requirements. So let's explore the examples that they provided. Schools or districts that have been primarily in a fully remote model all year can submit a waiver if they need additional time to return all students to full-time in-person instruction. For instance, seeking first to return in hybrid before proceeding to full in-person instruction later in this school year. I want to tell you that we will be ready on April 5th. I don't need extra time. We are preparing for this. We have students in our schools now. As a parent noted earlier, we have been in remote learning for an entire year. We have been planning for this. So I am not asking you, I'm not compelling you to say I need a waiver because I can't get this done. We will be able to get this done. Another reason for a waiver might be schools that operate with grades K through 4 configuration, with grade 5 in another school building may submit a waiver to delay implementation of full-time in-person learning for grade 5 at those buildings until the middle school phase begins. I am asking for your okay to apply for a waiver for the 5th grade because it is in a separate building and we want to make sure that the schedule is aligned with grades 6, 7, and 8 for transportation reasons, for scheduling reasons. So I would like to apply for a waiver for grade 5 to push them off to the April 25th or 28th start date, whatever that date was. And I want to be clear, another reason, or the third reason that they identified or gave an example of would be operational constraints. However, the caveat is simple. Waivers will not be granted for districts that indicate they cannot return to in-person learning due to space constraints or feasibility issues, but are maintaining a physical distancing standard in classrooms of greater than 3 feet. So in other words, you can't use the rationale, we want to keep at 6 feet, therefore we want a waiver. That's not acceptable. That's not a reason for a waiver. They won't even, according to this, if I'm reading it incorrectly, someone else in the group that's read it can help me. I don't believe they will entertain a waiver if we are still at the 6 foot mark.
Dr. Leclerc, if I could just make a comment?
Yes.
I think one of the other concerns that has been raised by some of the parents and certainly on some of our school committee member minds is also around the lunchtime periods.
Yep, I'll
right?
get to that.
And yep. Well, and so what I'm seeing here, well, unless it's a separate piece that you're about to say, one of the things that I'm concerned is that this is basically saying if we can, through our classrooms, meet that greater than 3 feet, we would not be able to seek a waiver for instance, Maple, where we will be very difficult, if not impossible, to be able to meet a 6 feet distance for the lunchtime situation. Is that correct?
I think, so I have a suggestion for that, Maren, if you can just hold that and I'll.
Certainly.
I don't know if it's the next slide. Oh, here it is. So things to know. We're required to do a family survey even before we can apply for a waiver. So that's a requirement. So we have to do that this week. And things that we are talking about, and this goes to some of the things that people have been discussing in the public speak. Lunch. We have tents. We're going to put the tents up. We are anticipating lunch will be outside under the tents. That will be the ideal. Remember, we're talking April 5th for elementary, and then we're talking the end of April for middle school. And then high school will be even later.
Dr. Leclerc, you're saying lunch is going to be in the tents. We don't have enough tents. I wanted tons of tents back in the fall. I was begging us to buy as many as we could. And my understanding is we only have a couple.
We have tents at each level. And
Little ones.
we will shift our, right now, because we're in this remote hybrid kind of, in this hybrid model, we all have lunch at the same time. All the students at the elementary school have lunch at the same time. We will expand our lunches and have more lunch waves so that we can continuously bring students out for lunch.
Is
So we won't have everyone going out under the tent at the same time.
Is there, so when you say tents are the ideal situation, meaning that's where lunch will occur always, and if the weather is such that it would not be possible to feed children outside, perhaps we would have a canceled school day. I just think if parents agree to send their child on the expectation that meals will always occur in tents, we need to be very clear that it's not going to be caveats where there might be a day where there would be unmasked and eating in an inside space.
Right. So and again, we're just getting all this information, but the discussions that we have had and in conversations I've had with other superintendents, students are going out every day and having lunch outside. I spoke to Frontier Regional Superintendent today, who said their kids are going outside for lunch. They go outside every day for lunch, they bundle up and they go out. So I'm thinking that that's the way we're going to go. I mean, and I guess this will depend on the spaces, and we'll have to take it building by building, but if there's a torrential downpour or if there's an April snowstorm, then we may need to go into the cafeteria at Maple, since Maren brought up Maple, let's use Maple. But again, if we have multiple lunch waves, we'll only have 1 or 2 classroom groups in there, all spread apart. And remember, we're not going to, for the remainder of this school year, it's not our intent to serve traditional hot meals. It's going to be the bag meals. So whether kids are eating in school or, in the tent, or whether they're taking it home, half day at hybrid, like they are right now, it's a bag. And that's not going to change for the remainder of the year.
So these comments about weather are another reason to ask for a waiver to give us more time, because towards the end of April, there are fewer chances of having inclement weather. Here in Easthampton, we had a blizzard on April 1st, not too long ago. So that's one of the reasons it would make it better weather-wise. We maybe could get more tents. A waiver doesn't mean that we don't want this. We want all our students back, but we need the time to make sure the teachers are vaccinated, which many will not be. Many won't even have had the first, never mind second. If it's not Johnson & Johnson, it's 1, then 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then 2 weeks after that. So,
okay, so let's just stick with what we know.
I'm giving facts right now, Dr. LeClaire. These are facts, not opinion, about when the vaccine works for educators and why more time is needed.
Right, but I did not see an example of applying for a waiver because we want to get more teachers vaccinated. I don't think that would be a rationale for the commissioner to allow for a waiver.
Right, and that goes hand in hand with our governor, who didn't give precedence to teachers, unfortunately. Okay. But what I'm saying is we have buildings that cannot accommodate feeding children safely, and it would be safer if we waited till we had better weather. And I'm very hopeful that there are legislators in this Commonwealth right now, I've been in touch with some, applying for emergency legislation to give a 3-week extension to this mandate. So there was somebody from Alston working on it. I spoke to Lindsay Sabadoza today. This is something that has to be done now in the legislature to try, because 3 weeks is only 10 days in the classroom because of April vacation. And if everybody in this Commonwealth pushes for those 3 weeks, it would be safer for everyone all around.
So, Dr. Leclerc, do you want to go through this PowerPoint first and then take questions and comments? Because I have a number of them and I don't want to interrupt you. It's hard to do a presentation, but it's also sometimes...
One or two slides.
Okay, so we'll do that first, go through the two, and then we're going to go backwards, if that's
Sure,
okay, after
Yeah,
that.
and then I can stop the share so I can see everybody.
Well, I'm going to need you to go to the waiver page after we get through this.
Okay, sure.
All right.
So, thank you, Laurie. And I do appreciate you making the statement about the legislators and getting them involved. I always think that that's an appropriate option. But again, from the perspective of the Easthampton Public Schools and the administrators that we have here, I believe that if you empower me, if you tell me to get this ready for April 5th, we will have it ready. We are making this work. And if there is, in the example you gave, Laurie, if there is a snowstorm at the beginning of April, we'll call a remote day. We have those mechanisms. We have those mechanisms in place, so we can do that. So the classroom setup, I think I've already alluded to the fact that the first piece really is the family survey to find out how many families would be willing to participate and come back in this model. And then we would need to go to the classrooms and actually space out the desks. And that would depend. Laurie Garcia might have 15 kids that want to come back. And maybe Cindy Kwasinski only has 10 kids that want to come back. So we would need to go and find, space all that out in those classrooms. So we're working on getting that ready. At the elementary level, the custodians are actually moving desks towards the classrooms right now to get them ready to go in when the opportunity comes. The space in our buildings and specialists moving around the building using carts. I heard, I think a parent in public speak about that. We need to explore all of the spaces in our building. We're not going to have designated spaces for our specialists if we can use those rooms in a different way. And obviously, we're going to need to look at our spaces and have them function as other classrooms, as rooms for reading instruction, anything like that. So we're going to need to, which we've already done a lot of that work. We have learning centers already in place. We have our specialist teachers are not teaching live in person right now, so they're already used to that setup. And transportation, we're simply going to have to, increase the number of students that we have riding on transportation, because I think perhaps if we have more students that want to return, we're going to have more students interested in the bus. So I'm not saying we want to get to a point where our buses are filled, but from an equity perspective, we need to be able to have transportation available for all of the students that would qualify for it. And whether that happens on April 5th or at the end of April, as Laurie mentioned, whenever the waiver takes place, we would need to have the transportation available for our students. And so that's it. So Cindy, you want me to go back?
I want, if you can, go back to the, right here. Okay. Yeah. School districts who have been primarily in full remote model can submit for a waiver if they need additional time. I'm telling you,
don't need additional time.
You don't need it to set up furniture. Okay. I am telling you that a district that has not been in person, that has been primarily in remote, does not have the experience to pivot quickly back and forth with staff, rooms, testing, quarantining kids, contact tracing when those kids are coming back, the staff. It is a nightmare. We are just beginning hybrid. And what you're going to see as we do hybrid is that there are going to be students whose family tests positive. There are going to be staff people who test positive, and there are going to be kids themselves who test positive. And the district, it's really a learning curve. This is not something that is easy. This is something that a team of people get headaches over trying to figure out. What room was affected? How many staff were affected? How many kids potentially were affected? Were there a primary contact? Were they a secondary contact? If they were, what's our procedure? How quickly are we going to send them home? How many people are we going to tell? What about the staff? How are we going to cover a classroom if the staff person is now in quarantine? Are we going to pivot back and forth to remote? What I'm saying is that we qualify for a waiver based on the fact that we need to take these incremental steps. We are just at the baby steps of doing hybrid and getting that experience. It is a nightmare for schools. Yes, schools have been doing it. There are schools that are in hybrid, but anyone will tell you on the ground that teachers are being asked to pivot really quickly. There's no subs. So you've got to quickly figure out and have a system for who is going to switch in and out of each classroom. I believe wholeheartedly that we need the extra time to allow staff, our administration, our health team, our COVID response team to know how they're going to respond when they get their in-school first case of students in a classroom and they tested positive. A student is in a classroom, their mom just tested positive. A teacher just tested. That is a big nightmare. And the idea that we can move furniture, I get it, okay? We might be able to move furniture, but I don't believe that we are ready now to jump from nothing, okay, from very little in-person experience to everybody's back in. And I understand that a lot of people aren't going to come in, but I don't think we're really prepared. Okay, your nurses had not had to do the work that other school nurses are doing, which is that quick, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And your principals are not experienced yet at having to do these pivots. And I know that because as a teacher, I talk to other school districts. As a teacher, I'm familiar with a number of them who are struggling with this and have gotten really good at it. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is possible, but it's a learning curve. We're not even close to the bottom of the learning curve because we are just opening now. That is my big fear. Okay? Because what happens is as soon as you have that exposure, you have to do that quick contact tracing. If you can't do the contact tracing quick enough, you've got to close down multiple classrooms. You're going to send everybody back and forth in remote. And if you don't have teachers to cover your classrooms, you're going to be flying back to remote. So my hope is that we get these kids in hybrid first. Give the district some time to get through this process, to learn how to do this quickly and efficiently, and who they're going to cover and how they're going to respond, and then make each step forward. You try this right now, and this is a disaster waiting to happen. And that's why this is what I want you all to think about. That is why this paragraph is one reason why you can get a waiver, Because if you have been primarily remote, you do not have the experience and the know-how to quickly respond should something happen. And something will, because it's happened in every single district that's hybrid. They have had to very quickly figure out how they're going to respond and cover classes, pivot back, go back into remote, and keep the school safe. And many schools have done it beautifully. It can be done, but it has to be done with experience. Lori, sorry, but
No,
I believe we qualify right here.
Thank you for that, Cindy. And I just want to repeat what I said a few moments ago, that if we have classes that have less of a distance, and I know, Dr. LeClaire, it doesn't mean 3 feet, that it has to be. We'll try for 4, 5, or 6, but our classrooms are small and there is a lot of students going into them. So for DESE, they say it's 3 feet from nose to nose. I am talking to teachers who have measured their classrooms. They only have 1 foot in between the desks. They can't even walk through if it's 3 feet nose to nose. And once again—
I don't think you're talking about Easthampton though, right?
I'm talking about if you have to put, but we don't, have we tried to fill the classrooms? Have you measured the desks? And
all of our classrooms are, at the elementary school, our classrooms are of varying sizes. And what we have done is we know that some classes, we have more students that want to return than other classes. So we have been switching rooms around. We have been measuring it out and shuffling classes around. Teachers have been moving to different rooms to accommodate the size of the group that they have. So smaller groups are being put in smaller rooms and larger groups are being put in larger rooms.
And Dr. LeClaire, I know how much work this is for you and the administrators and the teachers that are in the building. And I appreciate all of that. And I know this whole mandate took us all by surprise. But once again, I want to say that per CDC guidelines and what we talk about in the COVID response team, if there is a positive case and if somebody is within 6 feet, it does not matter if that person is masked. If there is a closer distance than 6 feet, that is somebody that is a contact. So it's going to open up many cases of people being in quarantine and also teachers.
You want to talk about disrupting the education of kids. This is the quickest express train to disappointing everybody in our community. Because when you have to close down a classroom, an entire grade or a classroom, and multiple teachers, because you had that case, everybody slides back to remote, and families are surprised very quickly and have to, okay, well, now I got to do it again. I have to find my coverage. I do believe that we are taking the right steps in getting kids back. But this giant leap, first of all, I think it's shame on Jeff Riley, because I think that this does not follow the science. They're giving up that 6 feet is something that I will always oppose because it's not medically sound. And we've talked about teachers. Yeah, I understand his waiver is for this, but I'm telling you, we qualify because we've been primarily remote. But saying that teachers can get vaccinated, and we can talk about that later, is a nightmare for them to try to get that appointment. It's not going to happen. Okay, many people are already disappointed who have real medical reasons why they should be getting it, and they're not able to get it. It's a nightmare. So I'm going to be quiet and just let other people respond. I don't want to, but I had to get this out. I would like everybody to please be thinking about this. We have been remote. We do not trust me as a teacher in a district. I'm also on my district safety team. I can tell you that it is a very hard thing to go from fully remote to fully in person with a tiny practice round of a couple of weeks. Now I'll
Well,
zip.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Laurie. I just wanted to say, you know, I appreciate your sensitivity to the issue, and I hope that I get the point across that my team and I will rise to any occasion. We are dedicated to getting students back in the school. And I want to be clear that, and I think all of you know, there's nothing I want more than to have all the kids back in school. And we don't always agree on the methodology to get there as a school committee, but I appreciate your perspective as an educator and as a school committee member, perhaps, and I don't want to come across as cavalier in saying that we can rise to this occasion in 4 weeks, because I do understand the gravity of the work that needs to be undertaken. And I understand that we are in our infancy, if you will, in coming back in hybrid. But that doesn't mean that I still don't want kids back on April 5th, because I do. But I understand your comments. Laurie, I see your hand up, but I don't know if anyone else's hand up. Do you want me to stop the share? I can't.
That's what I'm wondering. Does anybody need to see a slide? Because otherwise we'll just continue on.
Can I just piggyback on that, and then I'll be quiet because I've spoken enough per usual. But I once again want to say, I know that you have risen to the occasion throughout this pandemic, as has your team. And as a school committee member, as a COVID response member, I am so grateful for that. And the fact that you are saying that you could be prepared, I applaud you for that, because I know how many families want to have their children in full time. But I also appreciate, as I said, I tried to take notes. We have to be creative, innovative, and bold, one of the parents said. Yes, we do, but we have to do it being timely, following science. And we also have to think this is a district that's working so hard to be equitable. It is not equitable that some families can say, we're going to stay safe and we're keeping our kids remote. And people that are working outside and people that have childcare issues and people whose children are suffering, they're going to go back and fill the classrooms. And those that realize that it is unsafe will be home. That is not working towards our goal of being an equitable district.
Jonathan?
If I may. So first, I just want to piggyback on Cindy's comments and I guess Laurie's comments, because I fully do believe in the ability of the administrative team to make it happen. I think that the capability is there. I would just put out the thought that just because we're capable of doing something does not necessitate that we're able to do it well if we are given constraints that affect our ability to do so. We've obviously taken a very cautious approach to this point, and I would continue to be in support of that approach. And I agree with Cindy that I think that first bullet point does give us the ability to apply for that waiver. I might also consider that the operational bullet point does as well, as we think about our constraints on lunches. I certainly am in favor of having students eat outside under the tents and whatever other creative methods we can come up with. But that is obviously a constraint that we have. I do have one kind of question to go along with these thoughts that I'm just going to throw out there now since I have the floor. Let's say theoretically, we, regardless of whether or not we apply for a waiver, let's say we don't end up with a waiver. Can we just say what families would need to do to remain in a remote setting themselves if that's what they chose to do? Are there any additional steps that they would need to go through on their end? And I just wonder if you could speak to that for families.
So my understanding in reading this, just, I did not dive into it deeply yet, but my understanding is that regardless of anything that we do, whether we return on April 5th or whether we do a waiver, we must survey families to see if their intention is to remain in fully remote for the remainder of the school year or shift to remote once we're going full time. So we need to gather that information. And so that I would need the answer to that, but we would have to survey people. For those already in remote, yes, they could easily stay in remote. They would just need to fill out that survey. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I think so. I just wasn't sure if there was something additional for families to do to circumvent this requirement, like a personal waiver, if you will. But it sounds like no, that's still their prerogative.
The option to be fully remote is still there for the remainder of this school year.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just add, it has been brought to my attention by some parents that in that survey, would it be possible to clarify, would you go back if students were eating lunch in the buildings, or would you go back if students will have the opportunity to eat outside? Because that will be a
I was
huge
going
difference.
to put some information in there.
Thank you.
About lunches, yes.
Yeah, and just to underscore that again, I know as a parent that will be a huge decision-making factor for me. I would want it to be like a promise from the district that lunches are outdoors, not they are mostly outdoors. I think I would feel very surprised if my child came home and reported that, oh, lunch was inside today.
Yeah, I get that. And that would be my preference as well. 100% outdoors. And just make sure your child is dressed appropriately.
I have a question. And yes, I'm sorry, Mary, you haven't had one. I just really quickly, a parent mentioned mask break should be outdoors. And I just want to understand, all mask breaks are happening outdoors. We are not allowing mask breaks inside, correct?
I don't know of any mask breaks are happening inside. I know that parent is the parent of a high school student, and I know Bill is on the call. He's in the Zoom meeting tonight, so you can ask him that question directly. There he is. I see him. I don't know if you see him, Cindy, but do you want me to, do you want to?
Yeah, but I think that is in terms of every classroom, we made a commitment that mask breaks would not be happening in the classroom.
They're not happening in the school or in the classroom. Mr. Evans, I think, there was just some information that went out and then that caused a question.
I can clarify a little bit. First of all, the outdoor mask breaks have one of the interesting phenomenons that we're noticing over the last couple of days is that students have not been taking off their masks while they're outside on their mask break. We're encouraging them to, but it's an interesting, maybe we discourage them from ever taking off their mask strongly enough that they didn't want to take it off during the mask break. I think the original plan, as we discussed having mask breaks outside, the question always came up, what if it's pouring rain and students still need a mask break? So our plan was to create spaces in the gymnasium, the cafe commons, the auditorium, where students were well more than 6 feet apart. And we weren't quite sure how many kids as we were developing this plan, we were still getting feedback from parents about who was coming and who was not. Based on the numbers we have now, or we've had over the last 2 days, if those hold consistent, a couple of things. One is we'll be setting up the tent to allow anybody who wants to go outside for the mask break to be able to go outside. 2 is I think that we'll be able to create distancing inside that is probably 15 feet apart between the gym, the cafe commons, the auditorium. And I think a number of students are choosing just not to take the mask break and to keep their mask on.
Okay, Bill, just so you know, you're difficult to hear with the setup that you have. You just keep breaking up. But I think we got most of what you said.
Yeah, it's this crappy microphone. But I think given what we're seeing so far, that one, those that absolutely need a mask break and need to do it outside can do it outside once we get the tent up, which I believe is happening this week. We're only talking about situations where it's really raining very hard. And I do think that if we were forced to have it inside, we would be able to get a lot of spacing. And I'm guessing that a lot of students would still would choose not to take off their mask, even though they're getting that opportunity.
So a lot of districts that I know of are canceling mask breaks if the weather's really bad, and just giving kids a mental break from the computer. Take your eyes off the computer.
We've been in 2 days, so we haven't had the, fortunately the weather's been nice so far.
Thank you. That is my point. You've been in 2 days. So Mayor, you have been waiting patiently.
Okay, so I realize, Dr. LeClaire, that you just got this info, so I'm not really looking for answers like now, but would just want to get them on the record. So as we get more guidance, or I was on that call with Commissioner Riley with the other mayors, and I asked some of these questions, and they're supposed to like do a fact page with this sort of stuff, but I just, you'll probably hear before I will. With remote students, students who choose to stay remote, will all of that time in learning count for them because they've chosen remote?
Yes.
And then do we have enough staff for April 5th, given the numbers that are coming back? I'm really worried about students who are remote or come back in person, and because of various reasons that doesn't work out. Can the waiver request that those time and learning hours be done over the summer in a summer academy, or another option, especially if they're vital? Like I'm thinking of our seniors and math and English, whatever the requirements end up being. For meal delivery for students who are remote or charter or choice and are doing remote, is there a way, will, under the food waiver, will we still be able to deliver meals under the food program? I'm saying I will figure out how we deliver meals with or without the waiver. To be clear, I've made that promise. I'm sticking to it. I just want to put out there, if, do we have an idea of where the food waiver is going to go as far as bag lunches to go? And then my last one is around transportation. And I am afraid around transportation and the effects on parents and kids with different schedules. And I'll go back, I think Lori brought it up, maybe Shannon, just equity issues around this transition back and suddenly have to shift remote. Some families can just pivot on that better than others, and others can't do it at all for a whole bunch of different reasons. And that's something that I'm struggling with hearing the information, but I do understand it's very new. I also understand there are a lot of districts that will be filing waivers. Some already have. So my last question would be, do we know what happens if the waiver is denied? So that, and I'm not saying you should know answers now. I just, I
don't have, I can tell you a few things. The staffing issue, we do currently have a few openings, we currently have an opening for a reading specialist who is not a classroom teacher, but obviously still a very important role in our district. Mm-hmm. We're looking for another ELL teacher, which is an addition to the two that we have, because we're looking to, from an equity standpoint, we feel that that's a need. So, the staffing is a moving target. I won't deny that. The remote students, I already said that counted. The summer academy, we've begun discussing as a leadership team, having summer academic programming at all levels, using some of those federal dollars that we had to help students catch up over the summer. So that is something that we've already begun looking at. The transportation, the meals, we just learned today, Mayor, that the meals waiver will be extended through the summer. So that gets us a little bit longer. And as I've already mentioned this evening, our plan is to continue with the bag meals. That's just easiest for them to prepare. They're portable, and so they can go outside easily. So I'm sorry for the kids that like the hot lunches. That's just a sacrifice we're making this year. The transportation, the equity issue, I do hear that, and I'm not sure how to solve it. But I also, I've heard a lot of great things about equity tonight, and I would add, which I know all of you already know this, but I would add the comment that many families expressed to us, either through phone calls to the administrators or through surveys, that they were unable to take advantage of our current hybrid situation because it's only a half day. And these are families that, both parents are working or a single parent is working. They just don't have the flexibility to get their child midday. They have to keep them in a daycare or, some home childcare option because they can't do it. So from an equity standpoint, there are so many different variables related to equity, but I do feel like we are missing some families that are really, really dying to come back to school, but because of the schedule we're currently promoting, they're unable to do that in their lives. So there's so many equity issues.
No, thank you very much.
Shannon?
I'm just curious. So April 5th is K through 4 or K through 5.
Yeah.
Just curious, is the option available for the other schools to go full-time? Or are you just looking at K through 5 because that's the mandate?
That's the requirement. Mm-hmm. However, Shannon, you bring up a good point. I mean, obviously there are schools across the state that have students in full-time right now. I mean, this committee could decide tomorrow, we want the middle school to come back full-time. And that, you could do that. So the commissioner is just requiring that we look at the youngest learners. I think for many of the reasons that we've talked about before, they struggle the most with the technology. They've been in school buildings the least. They need to have some of those social emotional experiences. But there's obviously very similar needs at the middle and at the high school. Middle, they're saying, is coming back on the 28th, right after the school vacation.
Right, but then there wasn't really any information on the high school. And
You're
I'm
right.
thinking, if they go back sometime in May, they graduate 4 weeks later. So that's why I was asking, if there was an opportunity at all, if, we were going to open to open.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Maren, did you want to say anything before Lori?
Yeah, I mean, I think my perspective is that I see a lot of different sides here, right? I just definitely see a very unfortunate situation from the state. I think that they dropped the ball last spring, last summer, and now are stepping in to try to sort of dictate something top down that doesn't fit. And I think that that's a really unfortunate situation that if we had had better leadership, if we had had more sensitive and flexible leadership from the beginning, I don't think any of the school districts, let alone our own, would be in the same situation we are right now. So I think that that's a really strong given for me. And I do have concerns with the sort of pieces that they're putting out there and some of the direction that they're requiring that we now fit in. And yet at the same time, I just want to also say that overall, I think that, and I want to support the superintendent, Dr. Leclerc, who's saying, we are learning right now. We're not at zero and suddenly going to have to go to 60 miles an hour. We are already learning about shifting and making these systems work. So having another month before we were able to then be required to have all of our K through 4 students in school would definitely be pushing faster than we're on the track to right now. But I also think that we could do that. And I think that it is something we should be looking at how to do. I clearly, I'm very clear in terms of the numbers and what people are speaking to right now, know that that's not where this committee is going. But I do want to say that I think that we should be looking at that. And I think that we should be pushing towards getting our schools open as opposed to trying to look at all the different ways we can try to keep the brakes on. And so I, unfortunately, very clearly I'm the minority in this situation right now, but I think that we, with safety, with science, with intelligent, creative, flexible ways, we could make this work and we could proceed with what Dr. Leclerc is requesting for us to do.
Thank you.
Lori?
I agree with much of what you said, Maren, but I think that it's important to have more time to adapt, as many districts are asking for, especially with the vaccination issue, getting used to having more kids in for longer time. If it is such a hardship, and I can understand that, we decided in the COVID response team to do the half day because of the issues around lunch. We couldn't have put these kids outside in a tent when it's 20 degrees out. So we did that thinking about science. But now that it is getting warmer, maybe we could bring the kids back a full day hybrid, as many districts have done. And then that's an incremental step to getting all of our students in. So I do have to say that I've heard in state meetings that people have applauded Easthampton for the model of kids taking their lunches home. So it's something we should be very proud of.
And Maren, I'm not saying we shouldn't go back and we shouldn't look for creative responses and solutions. I've been shouting from the top of the mountain that we need more tents. If we had more tents on each site, large tents or more, to put more kids in, we would be able, especially, I love the idea of the spring. The weather is much better. We would be able to put more kids in for longer periods of time. We don't have enough tents, I believe, to do the distancing, the outdoor eating, and the teaching I have the great privilege of, in the fall and spring, teaching in a tent. And I've been my district was able to get them. I have been very happy, so have my students, with being able to be in person and having their class be in a tent. We don't have enough in Easthampton to bring every kid back and keep them safe and keep the staff safe and in the building. I'm not even worried that, people were talking about kids being able to stay home, and I agree, parents and families can choose that, but we need to keep our teachers in, and we need to keep our classrooms open. And that's the baby step that I'm trying to talk about. If we purchase a ton more tents, I would see this totally differently. What I would like us to do is apply for the waiver based on the fact that we have been remote for most of the year, and then absolutely look at creative solutions to be able to pack more kids in, be it week by week, be it, grade by grade or school by school. You can add more in. Even though you're a district that's hybrid and kids have been home learning, most districts find a way they've gotten used to this, so they're good at recreating spaces, opening up their tents, and allowing more kids to come back. So I do think we could allow more kids to come back for longer periods of time, do it safely, and stay open. But it is going to require either us taking on new spaces or getting more tents, at least for a while. I mean, that's my hope, is that we get the waiver and we still work on bringing more and more kids in.
Cindy, what's the timeline that you're imagining there? Like if we're waiving ourselves from the DESE timeline, what are we picturing as Easthampton's goal for offering full-time or full-day programming?
For instance, and I'm aware of a number of districts that are doing this, with using outdoor spaces. There's, instead of doing April 5th, where the elementary kids come in, we might be able to absolutely get them in safely and manage those spaces by April 28th, right after April vacation. But it takes us making a commitment to doing it in a creative fashion and understanding just how difficult it is when you're putting these bodies together and you're putting teachers and staff together. Unless you've been doing it, it's a nightmare when you get a case here and a case there and a case in this class. Outdoor spaces is the easiest way to prevent that from even happening. So in my vision, my hope is that at the end of April, we would be able to have more kids in the elementary grades coming back full time, and using, I don't care, move all the high school tents to open spaces, for elementary.
Is the end of April, sorry, is that my microphone? Is the end of April really, I'm just trying to figure out what are the reasons behind our timelines. And so are we really looking to build in that extra time to ensure that teachers are vaccinated, or is it that you are unsure that we would be able to secure outdoor spaces and tents before the end of April?
So my concern is that the system's no one has lived this in Easthampton, and there is a learning curve to keeping everybody safe and acting quickly and being able to pivot. And it can be done. So I'd like to see us have a few more weeks of learning how to do that so that we stay open. I don't want to close. I don't want to open up our school and then have to slam down remote. I've seen it happen. It's awful. And it's awful for the families that want to get going. Better to, like everybody's been saying, how wonderful it is to get into school. I agree. It is so much better to be in person and to teach in person. But the worst thing is you start to get into school and then we have to slam it down because we didn't have the experience to move quickly to figure out how to keep everybody apart. And I'm going to tell you, at 3 feet, you're going to see a bunch of cases and you're going to close down. At 6 feet, you're not going to. Schools have been able to do it successfully.
Marissa, that day, I don't know if you're on the listserv for MASC. That was actually the proposed emergency legislation that came through our MASC blog that came out of the Boston area. So that's why I've been contacting state reps about it to support it, because it really makes sense, because the 26th would only mean, as I said before, a difference of 10 school days because of the 5 days. But those 3 weeks would provide a great amount of time to be able to get everything in place, have better weather, and have teachers vaccinated.
Okay.
So it makes complete sense. It's Monday, the 26th.
Yeah.
And so can I just ask a clarifying question? And this goes along with what Marissa just said. Would it be your understanding then that on that date, we would have not only K through 4, but also 5 through 8, because it would be their day to return?
I wouldn't see any reason to not do the whole district if we believe we can do it safely at the elementary and middle level. I would see no reason to exclude high school students.
Well, I think the reason why that plan is excluding high school students is they do better with remote and they don't have a plan for it. They're thinking that little kids either, if they get COVID, respond very well, but the teenagers, you're running a real risk at a high school level to have teenagers less than 6 feet next to each other. You're running a risk. You're going to have a greater risk of shutting down. And I think that's why even DESE has not come up with the plan for the high school yet, because that's a different, teenagers are getting it. They are also getting very ill. And so it's a whole different ball game when you're looking at high school kids. And I think that plan will be coming, but it's just not ready yet. Dr.
Yeah, I think that, I was just going to say that in the legislation that came out, it articulates that DESE would roll out that information by mid-April.
Yeah. And again, you're talking 2 or 3 weeks to give a district time to put that plan into place. So then it's in May. You know, your seniors are done at the end of May. I'm not saying, you know, it couldn't happen. I just think we're going too fast. So, and I'm willing to have us have more discussion, but I am 100% believing that we get the waiver and that we get as many tents as we can, and we look for an eye at getting as many young kids in for as many days as we can, as quickly as possible, but not this April 5th. I don't believe we can do it and keep our district safe, because I don't think we have the experience. And that is why that clause is in there. We have been fully remote almost all year long. We can put a chair here. It's not the same as actually living and breathing it and seeing it happen and having to make those quick decisions. That's my personal belief. We need the waiver, and then we need creative plans. And I would love to get 7,500 tents, not that many. I'm a little...
Well, I think, you know, and I've said this before, and I'm happy to walk around with you around the schools, but we are very landlocked, and there's not a lot of places to put tents. And at Maple, we will have 1 tent, which is what we had in the fall. Could we possibly put another one there? Yes. But we also want some open space for children to run around. So, we're limited, and I would argue that there is a lot of evidence, particularly from the Harvard School of Public Health, that just opening classroom windows, and we've told all of our teachers, your rooms don't have to be warm. Remind students they can keep a coat on in class, they can keep an extra sweater on, they can bring a lap blanket if they want, they can keep a hat on. Keep the windows open, you will increase the airflow exchange at the K-8 level, not at the high school level, but at the K-8 level. Because of our buildings, you can open windows. The middle school's in the middle of a construction project right now. There's not a lot of space. There's not even enough space for all of our cars to park right now. So thinking about a tent, yeah, I could put a tent out there, but we're going to have a lot of angry staff members that don't have parking spots. So, I think we need to be realistic on the tents.
Well, I paced out and I could find a bunch of tent places at the high school. I paced that out and mapped out where we could put 30-foot tents, the big ones. So I know we can put some, and maybe we lose some parking places, but we add a tent or two at Maple and Center and Pepin, and I'd be willing to look at it with everybody. But I guarantee that if we do this, and we do a few more tents, as many as possible, we can get more kids in. Now, Maren? Sorry, Maren was next, I think.
Actually, I was, but that's okay.
Oh, sorry, Shannon, you don't keep your hand up. Go ahead, Shannon.
Well, I was going to ask Allison if you can you pull up the slide again where you have the number of students that are still hybrid and remote, like they're fully remote?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get a chance to really look at it when you had it up before. So about a third of our students are home and they're not coming back.
Currently.
You're muted, Allison. Allison, you're muted.
We know some are home for the remainder of the year. That is true. Some are home because their families cannot do the half-day model because of childcare issues. And some are home and they've expressed that they just want to see how it goes. So every day, the administrators are getting calls, oh, so-and-so has changed their minds. So I'm going to continue to update this for you, but I think in the next couple of weeks, you're going to see the numbers shift more towards more students in person.
Okay. Now, if we, my personal opinion, if we file the waiver, and I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but I'd want to, if we were to do that, I'd want to make sure all the schools go back at the end of the month. I really
the end of April.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm still not sure how I feel about the waiver, but as far as the tents, Cindy, there's no place to put them.
There is at the high school.
But that's the school that has the most room.
I understand that. But
those are the kids, Cindy, keep in mind, those are the kids that right now are not going to be returning fully in person. I mean, that's a discussion we can have in a little while. But for the sake of this discussion, I think last fall, I'm just going to remind everyone, we were talking about additional tents at the high school when we were having the little ones at the high school.
Yeah.
And now the little ones are not there. So that's,
right.
Yeah, so it's a different ballgame.
So, Shannon, are you done? I can't see you.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's all I had.
So I think let's sort of try to break this down a little bit into some different pieces, right? So one of the biggest concerns from my perspective, based on the DESE's sort of stepping forward in terms of what their new regulations are requiring us to do. One of the biggest ones that was definitely still a concern for me was lunch, right? So that was poorly offered, poor guidance, not science, just not happy with what was coming down from DESE. However, hearing that Dr. Leclerc was planning for outdoor lunches, and I think there was still some pieces there that I certainly would want to understand in terms of how many tents and how much space we can actually fit and where, how many students. I mean, there's details there that I would want to hear more about, but it seems like the lunch piece has the potential to be solved through having outdoor lunches and shifting lunch times to get enough classes in those pieces out there to do the lunch. So if the lunch piece is solved, that's piece one, right? Particularly if this committee is sounding like there may be more potential for us to consider this state requirement if we were to postpone until April 26th, which again, I mean, the state's guidelines are, from my point, again, not taking a lot of things into consideration. Having this mandated 2 weeks and then a week off vacation where people are going to be traveling or what have you is again, pretty poorly planned. But so if we were to say we're going to push this back to April 26th, giving us more time to have better skills and knowledge and experience by everybody involved, clearly by the 26th of April, we're not talking about one window being cracked an inch. We could have every window in classrooms open. We could have multiple fans blowing air. So when you start to look at 3 feet apart at minimum, and some classes, they'll still be able to keep 4 or 5 feet apart, depending on how many students are coming into those classes. The amount of airflow that you're going to be having circulating in those spaces is going to be much higher. And that's going to be able to get any of those sort of air droplets or concerns out of those spaces. So to me, while I don't like it, I certainly prefer having our kids back in school, even with closer spacing, by the time we're with that kind of warmth and being able to have windows open and have really solid ventilation happening. So that's another piece that feels like if we were able to postpone this to the 26th, seems like that fits my needs, and it certainly sounds like it could fit more of potentially your needs as well. Lori, I'm going through a list, so it's going to take another minute or two, okay?
No, that's fine. We've talked a lot, so.
Yeah, you guys have talked a lot, so let me talk for a few minutes here.
That's right.
So one of the other big pieces that I feel like we all could certainly agree with, that, you know, that I've heard a number of you speak to, is around vaccinations for our teachers. Definitely the April 5th timeline does not allow for the 2 different vaccinations, if that's what some of the teachers end up needing to get, or how they get appointments, or all of the sort of challenges that are certainly going on with appointments. But if we were to be waiting until the 26th, certainly that provides a whole lot more time, potentially to be able to get through both shots, or at least to be getting, depending if they're only getting 1 shot with the Johnson & Johnson, that would happen in that time. So it seems like that certainly gives us a lot more time to be able to meet that need of having our teachers vaccinated. So at least from my perspective, like, I still do think that we should be looking at April 5th to meet these guidelines for our K through 4 students. I hear that's certainly not the opinion of a lot of these other committee members of our group, but if we were to push it out to the 26th, it seems like that's a goalpost of time that more people might be able to get behind. And so that would be a very different waiver process that we're looking to for Dr. Leclerc to apply for. If we're to say, we just want to push this back and give us time because we're not going to be ready to do that, I think it's very likely that we're just going to get turned down, and then we're going to be scrambling for the 5th, even with less time. But if we were able to put forward a waiver saying, look, we are, like you said, just coming back into a hybrid model. We're learning at a lot of different classroom levels about what's going on, what's working. And we can do this if we push all of our students back to being fully in classes by the 26th. and after vacation. After that break, it gives us all those pieces to fall into place. It gives more time for just all of the different factors going on. Then I think that's something that give Dr. Claire a whole lot of clarity that she could be then going forward in drafting what she's going to have to draft up for the waiver, and give a lot more likelihood that actually our waiver is going to get approved. So that's my thoughts right now. And
yeah, go ahead, Lori.
And I'm sorry if I do speak a lot, but being on the COVID response team, I do have Megan here writing to me all the time. And so she gives me input for what's being said instead of calling her on. So much of what I am adding comes from an epidemiological standpoint. And I don't mean to be the know-it-all. I'm just getting this information. And I just wanted to piggyback on what you said, because she gives me the information scientifically when it's being said. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt anyone. She said the airflow is only one part. It's good for the airborne small particles, but the barriers will still be needed for less than 6 feet to take care of the larger particles. So that is something that should be written in the waiver because of the airflow concerns in the classrooms, that the state said that they would help to fund these type of security measures. We should be asking for the plexiglass barriers that wealthier public school districts have shown in New York and private schools have. So when we hear all about these private schools, how they've been in, it's because they have it. Let the state provide it for us.
Every class has a barrier, absolutely. And the 26th of April gives us time to get barriers and also time to measure out every single room to the maximum distance possible, and to be able to really evaluate how many barriers you really need and how many can you get. Because again, you're getting a couple of weeks warning here. Oh, we want you to open April 5th. And guess what? If you try to scramble really quickly, unless you order now, if you and Dale order plexiglass barriers now, you might get in and get a number of them. But it is not as easy as one might think, because every school is now getting slammed with, oh, we're going to open up. And it's nice to tell us, oh, put a barrier up. It's another thing to get it. So giving us more time allows those barriers to come in, as many as possible that we can get. We put them in priority areas. Again, the high school, I agree, has a lot more room. You're not going to need that same thing. But the elementary and the middle school, I believe we do. We need that. Anybody else?
So I think if you are instructing me to file a waiver, then I think you need to take a vote on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure that they have their chance to talk about whatever's on their mind before someone makes a motion. So is there anybody else who has any thoughts? And just maybe this is a good time for me to share a little story about how difficult it is to get a vaccine. So if you qualify for a vaccine and you get on, it sounds, wow, great. I'll just pick my day, make my appointment, go in and get it. Well, unfortunately, so many people are on that you can turn your computer on at 6 o'clock in the morning and you will see a message that says 150,000 people ahead of you, and there are 1,900 shots. Now, what happens is a lot of people give up. But for many people that I have talked to, and my own self, I got my first shot. I was able to get my first shot, but it took 6 hours with a computer running, 6 hours, and how many teachers have that ability to be teaching and let a computer run? Okay, I was lucky that my husband could run a computer. It took 6 hours, and the system will reboot. And eventually we got an appointment. But it is not as easy as one might think. So giving people more time to get that vaccine, after your first shot, I think 10 days after your first shot, even if you need the second one, you're at something like 80% effectiveness. So those are great numbers, but you got to get the shot in the arm. And we keep talking about children not being at risk, but I'm really talking about teachers being at risk, because those teachers are the bodies you need to take care of those children. And so if we can get them vaccinated, if we have that extra time, your teachers are going to be more confident, they're going to be healthier, they're going to be able to stay in the building. I just think there are so many benefits to applying for the waiver, targeting the 26th as an opening time, and creatively thinking as much, push the outdoor learning as much as possible. Absolutely outdoor lunches. We would have time to talk about this and order separators, plexiglass on the desk, as many as possible, to ensure the safety, so that once you open and you get those kids in, they get to stay in, and we don't send them back home to their parents. Sorry, quarantined. That's a horrible thing to hear, and it really disrupts family. So I would like to make them up. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, if you want. I just want to say thank you to Maren for putting all those points together concisely. I really appreciate that. It encapsulated many of my own concerns. I would like to make a motion that we instruct Dr. LeClaire to apply for a waiver, given the points that we have made about the first bullet point regarding our recently coming out of remote learning, and with the intention of doing all of our due diligence to look at opening as many grades as possible on the 26th of April.
I second that.
Do we have any more discussion?
I would just request that it's not, it felt like it was left very open at how many grades. So I would like to say that it would be all grades would be looked to be going full person, full day on the 26th. I think that gives, for like our high school seniors, that's only 1 month of in-class learning. So I don't want to delay later for those students. I want to be able to have them have that full month. So I would request that it's very clearly stating that all grades will be starting then on the 26th.
And can we add with outdoor lunch?
Yes.
Do I need to remake the motion?
Yes, I think you need to remake the motion.
Yeah, I would do
Okay.
it again.
So, and to be clear, I mean, okay, because we're going to sort of jump the gun on Desi there at the end of the month with the high school students. Okay, so I'll make a motion. We instruct Dr. LeClaire to submit a waiver based on our district having been in remote learning up until a couple weeks ago. And in so doing, we plan to bring back all grades at the end of April on the 26th after vacation, specifically with outdoor lunches and
a full day program.
a full day program. Was that
I don't
implied?
want to.
That's what he's already asking. Desi's already asking.
Yeah.
This isn't me. This is the epidemiologist. Can we please add, if students are going to be less than 6 feet, to have barriers in place?
I was considering that and wasn't sure how to say it because what almost came out of my mouth was as many plexiglass barriers as possible. And then I realized that I just said those same words and they didn't really work out.
You guys, it is next to impossible to get plexiglass right now. I'm in manufacturing and I can't find it just for our regular everyday business.
I think that you need to keep the motion clean. When you start adding all the caveats that have to do with the running of the school, that's under my purview. That's not, you're the policy, so your motion should be a clean motion and not involve those caveats.
I
that's
agree.
Something that I should work on with the COVID response team. And I respect Megan, but there's also data that I've seen that, you know, the plexiglass or the plastic or any of those things can be germ ridden unless they're cleaned very regularly. And we don't have the staff to clean those. So there are pros and cons. So that's a management thing that I don't think you guys need to involve in a motion.
Well, so I agree with you. What I would actually say is that we make the motion to apply for the waiver, and we have a target of April 26th. But then I'm going to be really honest. I am going to be pushing to come up with every creative way of keeping kids safe, period. And if it's not plexiglass barriers, then it's more space and tents, or it's changing and cutting down to mostly your core classes and reusing spaces. So you can't have band inside. You can't. So that leaves sometimes rooms where you can open up for schooling, big rooms. Where you can fit a few more kids. But it's going to take some major planning at looking at your numbers and how many kids you can get in. And I think we need time to be able to do that. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be pushing every single time for you to be figuring out creatively how you're going to maintain safety. Because this isn't easy, but it is doable. But I agree. Shannon, that was my whole point. He gave us a couple of weeks. Oh, get some plexiglass barriers. That's easier said than done. That's like saying get teachers vaccinated. Easier said than done. It is not easy.
Dr. Leclerc, how are you feeling about the caveat regarding lunches outside?
I don't think that needs to be in your motion. Really, all you're doing is directing me to file the waiver. I mean, I have to give that information to families, but that was already.
I do think that is a big deciding factor in the support of at least some members of this committee in terms of whether we feel like it is appropriate to move to a full day model. I think the lunch is different from the rest of the questions around instructional time.
But I'm not sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You're making a motion to apply for a waiver, which is an extension to come back. But I don't think any of us are saying, we're not questioning the coming back full time. That's, we're all agreeing. The full time is not really the issue. It's the when we're going to do it.
But it's also at least the lunch piece is a critical piece to how we're saying it's going to be done. That I do not accept DESE's recommendations that of how they're gonna do lunches. And so what I am saying I feel comfortable with is that the outdoor lunch piece allows us a safe way for our students to be in school, eating food around each other.
Yeah.
And I do think it's relevant to the waiver piece because, again, it speaks to the operational bullet point of we don't have the means to have the students eat safely indoors.
Correct.
Okay, include it then, yep.
Well, I don't think that's going to be a reason to reject the waiver. The waiver,
Right.
we either qualify because we've been fully remote for so long, or they're not going to accept it. But I believe with a target date of April 26th, and the fact that we have literally been remote for so long, that we qualify and will get approved. I still say shame on Desi.
I just don't. I feel compelled to say this. The one thing that I've heard from this, I think there will be change. I hope there's outrage. But the commissioner was extremely clear in the press conference and also at the mayor's meeting that there will be very few waivers granted. So I'm not saying, I'm fine with the vote, but I don't want anybody listening or members of this committee,
to
like
think
that's the one thing we heard over and over again, very few waivers granted.
And I heard that 2 weeks ago on the initial guidance, and we have a meeting tomorrow. And I mean, unlike any of you, I have not heard of any superintendents that are applying for a waiver. They might be, but I mean, we're just getting this guidance today. So I know a lot of people were adamant, apply for a waiver, but we had been told, probably similar to the mayor, that there would be very strict reasons to apply for a waiver. It wasn't just something that, anybody could apply for.
Yeah, Commissioner Riley was direct. That's not a third, like he told us all point blank that this was the criteria.
Yeah.
However, very few waivers would be granted. And it was early on and whatnot, but I just wanted to say that before we move to vote. Thank you.
And I would just want to add, I think that I would certainly, if I got the chance to speak to Commissioner Riley face to face, I would certainly tell him where he can take some of his recommendations. But I think one of the things that I would throw a question out here is, in the light of what you just said, Mayor, about the chance of us getting this waiver might be low. Would it make sense for us to put forward two waivers? Because definitely, if we were forced to have to meet the April 5th date, we definitely do not want to have our fifth graders starting on the 5th and going to the school to Whitebrook. So that's the one challenge. I wonder, could we put forward two different waiver requests at the same time? Or do we need to wait for one to be rejected in order to put forward the other one?
I don't know. I think that's a great point, Maren. I say this just listening to everything and without, I say we should file two because, so whatever happens, except granted or not, we're keeping going. We know then we've not I don't want to say wasted time, but time has passed and then we have to file another one for 5th grade. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. And actually, Maren, that is one area that I know he will approve a waiver for, because he has said, if your 5th grade is not in your elementary school and it presents too many challenges, you can apply for a waiver and you will be granted a waiver. So that to me is, something that I think is a sure thing. So I will absolutely do that.
Mayor, do you think it would be better then, given what Dr. Leclerc just said, to wait and hope for more rather than just the minimum that would be guaranteed? And there could be just an emergency request after, like apply for the bigger request. That's the first part of my question. And then the second part is, do you feel that this conversation that's going on in the Commonwealth now about contacting legislators for emergency legislation, do you think that could be a good route to get this extension? That people on this call right now get in touch with Senator Vilas and Rep. Carey? and push for it.
Yeah, so the part one of the conversation, and that I think that right now what's before us is the question of filing waivers, and I think we should split our two waivers. You know, I think, and I agree with Dr. LeClaire on that. I think that contacting legislators with anything at any time is always really good. I would never dissuade that, and I think that they're, you know, from talking to the legislative delegation, they're getting comments and input on all sides of any given issues around school. So, I mean, to put the voice forward, I'm always a huge proponent of that. I do I guess if this body votes for the waivers, one or two or any, I think we should do that because that's what's available to us. And we've heard from the community, even though something could change in a couple of days. Like, you know, I mean, one of the questions I had for the commissioner is if we were to file a waiver of any time, how long would it be until we find out if we get it or not, right? Because we've got to prepare either way. So I'm in favor of going forward with two waivers and urging members of this board, but also members of the public with children or with not, to speak out and let their legislators and the governor's office and the commissioner's office know how they feel about this. I think the more they hear, the better. And over the course of the pandemic, I think we've seen some adjustments of course of operations because residents, constituents, stakeholders in Massachusetts have spoken out to our, you know, state and federal and gubernatorial constitutional electeds.
The piece that I would add to that too is that I think all of what you just said, Mayor, is totally true. I mean, we should always be reaching out to our representatives and governor and speaking of our mind on things. I think, like you also said, there's so many different opinions on this all across the spectrum. And the fact that the commissioner is directly working with the mayor for that legislation to actually pass, first off, it would have to gain momentum in the next 2-3 weeks to be passed to make any difference. And it would have to be veto proof. So the likelihood that it's going to be able to be veto proof so that it can force it past Governor Baker is, I think, a lot less likely. So I think that, you know, again, speaking to what Mayor just said too, we can do it what's in our power, which is moving forward with waivers and pushing that envelope. And certainly people should always speak out and be, you know, active, engaged citizens.
I have one quick question for Dr. LeClaire. The survey that you're going to send out to parents, is that going to be about a 3-foot distance? Are you going to ask them, are they willing to have their kids come in 5 days a week at less than 6 feet?
I think the less than 6 feet. I would, just to be as accurate as possible, I would try to capture the actual DESE language. Because I think people have a misperception that gets perpetuated on social media about 3 feet. And not every classroom will have a 3 feet separation.
Some will have 6. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it could be anything in between, depending on how many students come.
I think that when you send out your survey, it's important that you explain that in each classroom, the distance could be somewhere between 3 and 6 feet. Do you still want your child to come in 5 days a week, all day? Because again, viral loads build throughout the day. Yes, we're going to be able to open up windows. Yes, we've done our buildings. But the reason why I would really like to see those numbers, because a lot of parents are already having their kids be remote and may just say at less than 6 feet, more kids are going to be remote. And then the waiver is moot because we're still going to be in hybrid because we're going to have smaller numbers of kids in every grade. I'm really hoping that we get the waiver. I hope we get both. But it is what it is.
Well, let's vote. So I appreciate all of this discussion. It has definitely helped clarify things. I would like to make a single motion that we apply 2 waivers. One, to exclude grade 5 from the requirement that lumps them in with the elementary grades, and the other that allows our entire district to stay in a hybrid setting until April 26th, based off of the point made by DESE that would allow us to do so.
Because we've been in remote for so long.
Yeah, that one.
Okay. All right, any more discussion?
I would just amend that with adding that we are having lunch outside to be able to meet our safety needs for our students.
I was going to say that afterwards is something that we will be sure to continue talking about.
Can I second that?
The lunch or the whole thing?
The whole dang thing.
Including
I thought I seconded already, but you're welcome to, Shannon.
What's a new one?
It was a new one, Lori.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Okay, I'm seconding it.
Okay. All right, any more discussion? Okay, let's vote. Jonathan.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Mayor LaChapelle.
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Marissa.
Marissa Carreri, aye.
Lori.
Lori Garcia, aye.
Maren.
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Shannon.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Cindy Kuzensky, aye. Okay. Whew.
Okay, so are we done with that?
We're not done. We're going to keep bugging you. Trust me.
No, keep going, Alice.
We have the program of studies.
Yeah.
Also tonight. So
yes.
Before y'all start getting too tired, and this is way past Mr. Evans' bedtime right now. So
Bill, you have 5 minutes. Let's go.
Fortunately, I only saw like 4 changes. Maybe is that possible?
Yeah.
I think he kept the changes very, very minimal this year.
Yeah.
Well, given the course of the year, I don't think that we were entertaining a ton of changes, but I hope you had a chance to take a look. I just want to refresh my own memory. Right, so the Zello completion, starting with the class of 2022, Zello is our new post-secondary planning program. It's a terrific program, but requiring students to complete that is something we really want to encourage by making it a graduation requirement. Many students, if they go through their 4 years without going through a post-secondary planning, a formal post-secondary planning, they often get to the end without really understanding what their strengths are, what their career options are, what their post-secondary options are. So it's not a rigorous or arduous process. It simply provides opportunities for students, and we really want to make sure that we're encouraging it in a more formal way by making it a graduation requirement. So that's one. The next thing is the addition of 3 classes. I'll add them together. The addition of film and literature, the cooking class for the IIS class, and the communications and technology class. So film and literature and communications and technology are sort of lumped together. Last year, we had a reduction in our student population, which led to the reduction by a 0.5 technology teacher. So the way that works is you have a smaller 9th grade class coming in. It's not like they were all taking those tech classes, but we need 1 less English class, we need 1 less science class, etc. So the classes that were taught by the technology teacher then got moved into the schedules of the English teacher and the science teacher within their schedule, because they had 1 less 9th grade science class and 9th grade English class. So we kept some of the technology classes as they were. One of them became a communication and technology because I was moving to a teacher that has more of an English background, and film and literature was a class that had been in the program of studies many, many years ago that had, and the curriculum had existed and seemed like a nice fit as a new elective that we could add that would fit well. So those two classes. The cooking class is specific to our substantially separate program, IIS, Intensive Instructional Services. That class, that program has a class that is a study skills and PE every other day, and that runs for a full year. And the teacher of that program, after hearing in an IEP meeting one of her students say, "I'd really love to be able to learn to cook more," we started thinking that through and realized we do have a cooking space available that used to be occupied by a different program that no longer exists, and that we could add this cooking program every other day in the second half of the year opposite the study skills, instead of having it be so for the students it would be study skills and PE every other day in the fall, and then study skills and cooking every other day in the spring. We felt like that was a nice match. So the teacher involved has some certifications and some that speak to that, so we feel like it was also a good fit there. So those are the three new classes that are in the program of studies this year. And I think there was one more thing there. The business courses. So business courses actually had been phased out with a previous reduction in the in staffing before I actually got there, but the business classes had stayed in the program of studies. We hadn't been able to offer them for a couple of years. So looking at where we are with staffing at this point, it makes sense to keep those classes in the program of studies at this time. And those are the changes.
Shannon?
You knew I was going to ask a question. So the cooking class, is that similar to the one that was offered previously? That the program?
It was there. It got deleted before I got there, so I can't speak to what it was. But again, the teacher who would be teaching it is not just a fan of cooking. She has some certification in that area, so it would be more formal than just, "Hey, let's make spaghetti today."
And it was the person who taught, the crap.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. The other thing is, just out of curiosity, the business classes, what did we have in the?
There was an intro to business class. I think that's the last one that we were able to run, and I may have misspoke. That may have run in the fall of my first year. It seems like a very long time ago. And there were some others that were in there. I can't recall exactly what they were. I would have to look back at the previous program studies to see what was there, to see what we're taking out. But I know that we just couldn't put them in the schedule. So, yeah, I agree, Mayor. But it's been, it's been a while since we've been able to offer.
It's not the content at all. It's not the content.
Yeah, well, I might argue that.
Principal
anyway.
Evans.
I'm not done. My last question. Personal finance is a math class, right?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure. That's it. I'm done.
Okay. All right.
So I guess the one question that I would have, and I think you've already answered it because of your uncertainty in terms of the business classes. I think that having business classes at the high school level can be really helpful as students start to try to think about careers and how these different pieces fit together. Obviously, it's not an MBA or anything, but it sort of helps kids start to sort of think about how to sort of critically think about those different pieces. So while I understand your reason to remove them for next year and that we don't have teaching staff to necessarily teach them right now, I would challenge us and you and your staff to look at what we could build back in potentially and how to be able to provide a little bit more of a business piece to students at our high school level. I know that we have our internship program that they can go do get internships, and obviously that's a really critical part of learning how to take your skills from school into the workforce. But also from a business perspective, having at least the introduction to business could be a really powerful class to offer our students. So I would challenge us to look at ways to be able to bring that back in future years.
I welcome that. That would be great.
Jonathan?
So I just wanted to talk briefly about the communications and technology class. I was really interested to see that show up. Communications is one of the sort of 3 pillars of knowledge that I feel like is lacking from secondary education. The others, if you're curious, being civics, which I'm glad to know, is something that we're progressing on, the other being philosophy. But I took a look at it and it seemed like an introduction to a lot of, online tools, which is obviously valuable as we become citizens in this digital age. One thing that I felt like the description sort of kind of touched on, but like mostly danced around, was the concept of information and media literacy. There was some discussion in it, I think, of introducing students to using, the online tools to find the information that they need. And I would just sort of throw out the thought and challenge that those are some really important concepts that our society is grappling with, and that I think, deserve a place in at least one of the courses that we're teaching. And I would hope that, whatever form that class takes, that there's some, collaboration and integration of studies around that topic and work with the Library Media Center, and that we just sort of keep that in mind.
Thank you. We will. I agree with you.
Do we need to make a motion to accept these changes?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any more discussion? All right. So I'm going to kind of move around. Marissa?
Marissa Crary, aye.
Mayor LaChapelle?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Maren?
Aaron Goldstein, aye. Thank you, Principal Evans.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Lori?
Laurie Garcia, aye. And thank you for making the change to world languages. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And Cynthia Kwasinski, aye. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and staying up late.
Good night.
No worries.
All right. So now we just have to do payroll and a few matters for action.
Very good. While I'm pulling this up, I just wanted to mention I was able to locate our resolution against the MCAS testing. My sense of time was very warped. It was not January. It was actually October that we passed that resolution. So we were definitely thinking ahead and anticipating this problem all the way back in the fall. So I forwarded it to you, Cindy, so you'll have that on your again.
Thank you.
Okay. So I would make a motion to approve the school payroll dated 2/25/2021 in the amount of $525,316.96.
I'll second that.
Okay, Marissa?
Marissa Crary, aye.
Mayor LaChapelle?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Maren?
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Lori?
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Cynthia Kwasinski, aye.
Make a motion to approve accounts payable authorization for payment dated 2/25/2021 in the amount of $309,606.20.
I'll second that motion.
Marissa Crary,
Marissa?
aye.
Mayor?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Yeah, you did it. Lori
Garcia, aye.
Cindy Kwasinski, aye.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of the executive session dated February 22, 2021 to be withheld until the matters are resolved.
I'll second that motion.
Marissa Crary, aye.
Mayor
Mayor
LaChapelle,
LaChapelle, aye.
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Cindy Kuzensky, aye. Do we have anything under other?
I don't know if we just went too fast. Was there any sort of specific transportation or sports updates that didn't get covered, or were those
They
just
were on the slideshow.
okay?
I did a transportation slide, Maren.
Yep.
Just giving you the lowdown that we got everyone on. I didn't really have a sports update. I don't think basketball started playing any games yet because they haven't met the metric yet. So nothing's really happened yet.
Okay.
But they're practicing,
there in
right?
case.
They're getting the chance to
Yeah.
practice at this point.
Yeah.
My only other comment or question is, can Nicole, or sorry, Mayor LaChapelle, you mentioned you were working on delivering meals. Is that something we can add to the agenda next time? I don't want to talk about it right now.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay.
The transition hasn't happened yet, but yeah.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
So put on the agenda, delivery of meals.
Please.
Okay. All right.
I move we go into executive session.
Okay, so we do need a roll call vote, Marissa?
I second that, though. We need to second it.
Well, we're not adjourning, we're really just
Okay.
moving, so I
Can I
think
ask-
we're okay.
Can I ask one more other before we leave this meeting? So I'm looking at our schedule, and given what we just talked about tonight, and the chance that we may not, it's possible they're not going to approve the second piece of that waiver that we're requesting to push our schools back to the 26th. I just wonder that our next meeting is in 2 weeks on the 23rd, and then we don't have a meeting all the way until the 13th. So because it's the second Tuesday, which makes sense, but I just wondered if we wanted to follow that, or if we wanted to, I just wanted to raise a question, if we wanted to have the opportunity to have anything different from that.
Well,
because of what's happening in April right
You could
now.
hold an emergency meeting if you needed
Right.
to.
I think we go to the 23rd, we'll have the waiver done, and I mean, we should be able to, schedule another meeting with pretty short notice if we wanted to.
Okay, I just wanted to raise the
So
question.
that's a good point. That's a good point, because we're talking about crazy times again, shaking things up. All right, so we're making a motion to move into executive session. We just need a roll call vote. Marissa?
Marissa Crary, aye.
Did you all move? Jonathan?
Jonathan Schmidt, aye.
Mayor LaChapelle?
Mayor LaChapelle, aye.
Lori?
Laurie Garcia, aye.
Maren?
Aaron Goldstein, aye.
Shannon?
Shannon Dunham, aye.
Cynthia Kuzensky, aye. Thank you, everybody who stayed. Be well. And we will not be coming back. We will be adjourning from executive session. Thank you.
Good night, folks.